Our story begins here. A message informs passengers that the train is unavailable due to an accident, causing everyone to grumble about being late for their appointments. Amidst the crowd, a girl stands out. Some workers wonder what happened and why there's blood at the site. A voice below says, "It seems she passed away shortly after the accident." The girl, however, climbs the station stairs and leaves as the area is closed off for investigation. Behind her, 2 men and an ambulance. Her stomach growls as she walks away. A homeless man notices her, calls out, and asks, "Are you hungry?" She nods. He points her down the main road. As she walks, another woman offers directions, followed by a man, and finally, someone else who tells her to turn down an alley. She finally reaches her destination, a small, cozy restaurant. She approaches the door, and suddenly, everything inside is alive with laughter, the clinking of dishes, and the smell of mouth-watering food. A blonde man greets her warmly. "First time here?" he asks, noticing her hesitation. "I've never seen you before." Before she can answer, he rushes off to take orders from other customers. Delicious dishes are being prepared, and the people receiving them are practically glowing with satisfaction. Her stomach rumbles again. The man returns, asking if she's decided what to order. She nervously explains, "I'm really hungry, but I don't have any money." The man smiles. "Don't worry, you don't need to pay. Just tell me what you want." She's surprised. "Really? I can eat for free?" He nods. "Yup. This place is a bit different from other restaurants. No one pays here ever. Welcome to the restaurant of life after death." Meanwhile, under the scorching Korean sun, Lee Kang-jin, a 28-year-old construction worker, wipes the sweat from his brow. The elevator's broken, and today's temperature is unbearable. He checks his salary for the day, 140,000 won. Not bad, but he's still 1.3 million won short for rent. If he works 10 more days, he might just scrape together enough for his second trimester's tuition. Lying in bed, exhausted, he debates whether to nap before heading off to his part-time job. His phone rings a call from an unknown number. Annoyed, he answers, immediately launching into his usual spiel. "I'm not interested in insurance, church, or a new phone." The voice on the other end interrupts him. "Mr. Lee, this is Shin Soo-ho, a lawyer from Seoul A. Are you available for a quick conversation?" Lee, now curious, wonders why a lawyer would call him out of the blue. "What's this about?" he asks, suspicious. "I assure you, this isn't a scam. I'd like to discuss something important. Can we meet?" Shin's voice is calm but firm. Lee checks his messages and sees an address in Gangnam. The lawyer continues, "It's a story you'll want to hear. I'll wait for you." Intrigued, Lee heads to the location. It's busy, crowded, and feels a bit surreal. A man approaches, handing him a black card from the General Law Office. "Pleasure to meet you. I'm Shin Soo-ho." Lee glances at the card, then at the man, wondering if this is legit. "So, what's this about?" Shin's expression turns serious. "I'm here to inform you about the will of Kim Beek-rae." Lee frowns, completely confused. "Who?" Shin explains. "This woman left you an inheritance, a building worth 8.2 billion won. Lee's jaw drops. "Excuse me? There must be a mistake. I've never even heard of her." Shin nods patiently. "Understandable. Kim Beek-rae is your great-uncle's sister. After your parents passed, you lost touch with your relatives, right? Well, she didn't lose touch with you." Lee, still bewildered, rubs his temples. "This is insane. How can this be real?" Shin goes on to describe the building in question, showing him photos. "You can move in immediately. However, there's a condition. You must manage the restaurant on the ground floor for 5 years." Lee groans. "But I can't cook. What if I fail?" Shin shrugs with a smirk. "There's no such thing as a free lunch, Mr. Lee. But if you don't take the offer, the building will be donated to charity." Lee looks at the lawyer, dumbfounded. 5 years running a restaurant? I barely know how to fry an egg." Shin laughs softly. "Better start practicing, then." Shin advises Lee that if he signs the contract and accepts the terms, his company will cover all the costs. Lee checks the contract and sees it's true. Still, Shin adds that if Lee doesn't want it, they can always donate the building. Lee shakes his head, saying it's obviously suspicious, too hard to believe. A distant relative, whose name he doesn't even know, suddenly makes him the heir to an entire building in Gangnam, worth 8.2 billion won. It would take him 150 years of hard work to earn that. With doubt swirling, Lee bluntly asks if it's a scam. The lawyer calmly replies, "It's not." Lee sighs, saying he'll need to look at the contract several more times. "Are there any other unusual conditions?" he asks. The lawyer nods. "There are a few rules about managing the restaurant, but as long as you follow them, there won't be any problems." Lee reviews the rules and finds them oddly specific. Very specific. He scratches his head, thinking how strange they are. Finally, Shin asks if Lee has made a decision. After a long pause, Lee smiles, agreeing to take on the challenge. The lawyer immediately pulls out the paperwork, asking him to sign, and tells him to start the business the very next day. Though Lee thought it couldn't be a scam after all, there was a legit contract. He still wondered what might happen if it was. He signs anyway, thinking, "What do I have to lose?" Before leaving, Shin gives Lee a chilling warning, his face suddenly serious. "Pay attention to the operating hours. If you break the rules 3 times, you will lose the inheritance." With a parting look, he adds, "We'll be watching you." Lee nervously wishes him a good day, realizing that for the next 5 years, this will be his home. He checks the restaurant's kitchen, noticing the ingredients are fresh and ready. Were the previous owners running this place up until yesterday, he wonders? Everything seems perfectly prepared except him. Lee Kang-jin, 28 years old, can't cook to save his life. He looks around the kitchen, thinking, "I can't just sell instant noodles and fried eggs to customers." As he steps back, his foot hits something. It's a book. Curious, he picks it up and flips through it. It's a recipe notebook from the previous owner, filled with various dishes like pork, rice, and garlic stir-fry. Determined, Lee decides to practice. "Not because I'm hungry," he tells himself, stomach growling, "but because I have to." As he reads the recipe, his vision blurs and the letters start to dance on the page. The recipe for pork stir-fry transforms into something else entirely: fried pork with garlic. Suddenly, a strange aura surrounds him, and without thinking, Lee's hands move with perfect precision. In no time, he's cooked a dish that looks beautiful and smells even better. "Did I really make this?" he wonders, tasting it. The food is delicious, far better than anything he's ever cooked. "This is absurd," he mutters, remembering all the meals he ruined while living alone. Just as he's marveling at his newfound cooking abilities, someone knocks at the door. Panicked, Lee apologizes, explaining that the restaurant isn't quite ready for business. Then he checks the clock. It's already 11 p.m. Time had flown by. Flustered, he opens the door, and standing there is a beautiful woman, dressed in a traditional Korean hanbok. "Is it just you?" he asks, trying to stay professional while his nerves bubble up. The girl, who looks like a high school student, confidently asks for saju. Lee stares at her in disbelief. "Are you talking to me?" She rolls her eyes. "Are you deaf? Bring me saju." Lee squints, studying her. She definitely looks too young to be drinking, but she's acting like she owns the place. He recalls a past incident when serving alcohol to the wrong customer got him suspended for a month. No way he's making that mistake again. Politely, he asks for her ID. "Driver's license, passport." "I don't have those," she replies, annoyed. Lee frowns. "Well, without that, I can't serve you alcohol." She waves it off. "No need to worry about that. I don't have money either. Just bring me saju." Lee, now desperate, sprints to the kitchen and returns with a plate of fried pork with garlic. "Here, try this instead," he pleads, offering it for free, hoping she'll forget about the saju. As she peers at her reflection in the refrigerator, her face grows puzzled. Lee barely notices as he panics over a new problem. There are several empty wine bottles on the floor. How much did she drink? He wonders, terrified that this might cost him his job before it even begins. Thinking quickly, Lee asks where she lives, hoping to send her home before anything worse happens. She replies nonchalantly, "Kim Champon's house in Peach Valley, Jeonju." Lee blinks, completely lost. Where on earth is that? Before he can ask more, another person enters the restaurant. Lee's heart sinks. He's doomed. The new arrival introduces himself as Choi D-il from JS Finance, here to greet the new owner. He recognizes the woman, calling her older sister. "Wait, older?" Lee stammers, baffled. "She looks like a high schooler." Choi laughs. "Looks can be deceiving. Trust me, she's much older than she appears. Feeling relieved but also bewildered, Lee exchanges pleasantries with Choi, who hands him a business card and a cryptic warning. Don't believe everything your eyes see. As Choi calls for his sister to leave, she sighs, disappointed with the other customers, calling them too weak to share space with her. With that, she strides out, content that she's had her fill. Lee, still trying to process everything, waves them off, muttering, "Good luck with the business." The cook says he wants to work hard, but there are no customers. Kang reassures him not to worry, saying other customers will come soon, drawn by the smell of the food. Lee remarks that the previous owner seemed very skilled. Kang agrees, saying she was the best. When asked what kind of person she was, Kang laughs, saying she was a great person, a paradise for them. Chuckling, he mentions that he'd like some cooked sugar and meat jelly for tomorrow, and though it might be a bit rude on his first visit, he'd like to bring his team to dine. This excites Lee, who responds with enthusiasm, saying it would be like a party. Kang affirms that he'll come tomorrow at 11 p.m., a detail that catches Lee's attention. As Kang stands up to leave, he suddenly realizes that he can no longer see either of them, wondering how they disappeared so fast. Alone in the kitchen, Lee thinks it's strange that it's midnight on a Friday and there are still no customers. He wonders if it's because the store is old. Just then, two people, drawn by the smell of garlic, approach and ask if the restaurant is open, ordering 3 garlic dishes. Lee quickly tells them to sit while he prepares the food. As he cooks, one of the women asks if the owner has changed. He confirms that he's now in charge of the restaurant. The woman, with an unsettling look, warns him that he's going to have a hard time from now on. Lee, confused, jokes that maybe it's fashionable to speak in such a cryptic way and asks why he'd have a hard time. The women explain that it's because of the people who frequent the restaurant. They are not ordinary people. Lee laughs nervously, joking that maybe they're ghosts. The women give him a chilling smile, which leaves him wondering if he might be right. The women then laugh at his unease, making him feel mocked. One of them approaches him, ordering 2 bottles of soju. Lee tries to brush off his earlier chills, thinking these seem like lively and fun customers. When he serves the garlic dishes, the women happily dig in. After finishing, they stand to leave, and Lee quickly jumps in, asking for payment. The women say they don't have any money, leaving Lee unsure of what to do. They mention they are running late and start heading for the door. Desperately, Lee calls after them, reminding them they need to pay. The blonde woman asks if he actually needs money, to which Lee responds, "Of course, this is a business, after all." The woman shrugs, saying she understands, and then starts reciting some strange numbers, telling him to write them down, questioning whether he knows how to do that. She also warns him not to believe everything he sees. Before Lee can even react, the women vanish, leaving him to scream after them, still begging for payment. Lee reflects on the strange encounter and how he didn't make a single cent the day before. Determined, he decides today will be different. He opens the mysterious notebook, searching for a quick and easy recipe. Kimchi stew, kimchi rice, and spicy pork rice seem like good options. But as he reads, he notices something odd. The letters in the notebook begin to shift and move. Rubbing his eyes, Lee convinces himself it's just his tiredness playing tricks. But then, he realizes the notebook might have strange powers. As more recipes flash through his mind, a knife suddenly appears in his hand, and his body starts moving on its own, expertly preparing food beyond his normal skills. Lee knows something is off. How can he, a man who barely mastered fried eggs, be this good with a knife? Lee decides to test this theory by attempting a more difficult dish, royal bellflower japki. He's never heard of it before and assumes it must be challenging. If he can pull this off, he'll know for sure the notebook is enchanted. To his shock, he prepares the dish to absolute perfection. Amazed, he tastes it and, in an instant, is flooded with a childhood memory. His mother had once made him something similar, asking if it was good. He had told her japki was the best. Nostalgia wells up in him as he realizes the dish tastes just like his mother's, even though it's not the same recipe. Lee sets the dish on the table, slapping his face to wake himself up, thinking it's no time to get emotional. Still confused by the notebook's power, Lee wonders who that mysterious lady was. Strange things have been happening ever since he inherited this restaurant. The customers, with their odd warnings and lack of money, only added to the mystery. Even the lawyer said he'd be watching Lee's every move. Now Lee questions whether this inheritance is a stroke of luck or a curse. Suddenly, a man burst into the restaurant carrying lettuce and cheerfully shouting, "Good morning!" The man introduces himself as Suam, the one responsible for the ingredients, and his brother Su, responsible for the alcohol. Lee immediately thinks they look nothing like the lawyer he met earlier. Suam mentions that they didn't have many customers yesterday, and Lee, slightly embarrassed, asks how he could tell just by looking. Suam explains that he's been stocking the fridge for a long time, and that Miss Kim was like a mother to him. Suam then sternly asks Lee to take good care of the restaurant, adding that if Lee ever needs anything, they are always around to help. After the brothers leave, Lee opens the restaurant earlier than usual, adding new menu items, hopeful for a better day. However, hours pass with no customers, leaving him frustrated as the neighboring restaurants bustle with business. Finally, a customer arrives, and Lee greets him with excitement, only to find that his customer is a child. Confused, Lee asks where the child's parents are, but the boy casually says he came alone and orders a bowl of pork rice. Lee prepares the dish to perfection, adding an egg roll on the side and serves it to the boy, telling him to let him know if he needs more side dishes. Watching the boy eat heartily, Lee can't help but feel proud. Half the dish is already gone, and Lee adds more meat, reminding the boy to eat slowly. As the boy continues eating, Lee chuckles to himself, thinking, well, at least he likes spicy stir-fried pork. Lee comments that this side dish is his favorite, and when eaten with his mother's fried egg, it's as comforting as a whole bowl of rice. The boy, mid-bite, suddenly stops eating, and Lee jokes, saying he could have eaten it all day. The boy, however, looks up and says, "It tastes just like my mother's cooking. I could eat it all day too." He continues eating, but soon tears start falling as he chews. Lee, surprised by the emotional reaction, tries to console the child, but the boy doesn't stop crying. "Why are you crying?" Lee asks, concerned. The boy sniffles and replies, "I miss my mom." Touched, Lee reassures him, "I'll always be here, and you can come eat whenever you want." But the boy shakes his head. "I have to go see her," he says. Lee, curious, asks, "Where is she?" The boy, with a faint smile, thanks him for the meal. Suddenly, a strange ripple appears on the floor. "I know where I need to be now," the boy says as his body begins to fade into bright light. Lee instinctively shields his eyes from the brightness, and when he looks again, the boy is gone. A moment later, a crisp $1,000,001 note floats down and lands on his face. Startled, Lee stares at it, completely confused. Asterisk, what the hell just happened? From behind him, Shin's voice breaks the silence. To be precise, something that makes Ghost happy is happening. Lee spins around in shock. "When did you get here?" he blurts, then immediately shifts his focus. "Wait, what do you mean, ghosts?" Shin chuckles and responds, "Does it make sense for a check to just fall from the sky?" Lee, flustered, throws his hands up. "What's going on? Every customer in this place has been acting weird. What is this? Some kind of Twilight Zone?" Shin, still amused, leans against the counter. "This place, Lee. It's the border between the underworld and Earth. Ghosts come and go, looking for something familiar like food." Lee's eyes widen. "Ghosts?" Shin shrugs. "Didn't you notice? Your suspicions were right all along. This restaurant is where spirits come to eat the food they miss from their lives. They come here for a meal, a drink, something to make them feel human again." Lee's mind races as he tries to process this. "Ghosts," he mutters, more to himself than to Shin. "I've been serving ghosts." Sensing Lee's unease, Shin reassures him. "You don't need to worry. No ghost will harm you as long as you respect them. It's like getting mad if someone hurts your favorite dog. If you protect them, they'll protect you." Lee, still spooked, admits, "Dealing with ghosts is unnerving." Shin chuckles. "Are you more scared of ghosts than people? Think about it. Aren't there more terrifying people in this world?" Lee thinks back on the shady characters he's met in his life and reluctantly agrees. "Fair point. Still, it's a little freaky." Shin smiles. "Just keep doing your best. Be cautious, sure, but you've got this." Lee then hesitates. "What about the ghosts who don't pay?" Later, alone in the kitchen, Lee pulls out his phone and Googles ghosts. He mutters, "As if drones delivering packages wasn't weird enough, now I've got ghosts as customers." According to his search, ghosts are spirits of the dead. Those who lived happy lives become good ghosts, but the bad ones, well, they become dangerous. To get rid of them, you can cook red bean porridge since ghosts hate the color red, or call a shaman to scare them off. But the best solution is to respect them and let them leave on their own. Lee chuckles to himself, thinking, asterisk, maybe if I feed them well, they'll just leave quietly. Still, he decides, asterisk, better safe than sorry, and ties on his apron to make some red bean porridge. As he stirs the pot, his thoughts drift to the man from Jay's Finance, who said he'd be back for dinner with his team tonight. That means even more ghosts. Suddenly, the same man appears in the kitchen, causing Lee to jump. "Did I scare you?" the man asks with a sly grin. Flustered, Lee quickly shakes his head. No, nothing surprising at all. He asked if Lee had forgotten about the company dinner, and Lee quickly reassured him, inviting him in. Several people entered the restaurant, all with friendly demeanors, but Lee eyed them suspiciously. The men commented on a familiar smell, wondering if it was what they thought. Meanwhile, Lee believed the anti-ghost dish he had prepared was working. The men called Lee over to their table, making him nervous. When they asked if he had made red bean porridge for them, Lee, a bit awkward but pleased they liked it, nodded and said, "Yes, I did." One of the men caught Lee's attention, commenting that he seemed to know the restaurant story. He added that, contrary to popular belief, ghosts aren't picky about food. The man assured Lee there was no need to be afraid, they weren't much different from humans, just employees. What the man said made sense, and Lee felt a bit ashamed for being scared. He decided to make it up to them by serving a special dish, pork jelly with buckwheat and seasoned vegetables. Lee had cooked everything to perfection, and one of the men praised the food, calling it delicious. Another chimed in excitedly, promising to come back often. One of the employees invited Lee to join them for the meal, but Lee politely declined, claiming he had business to attend to. The man warned him, however, that he wouldn't have any other customers while they were there. This piqued Lee's curiosity, and the man explained that most ghosts were indebted to Jay's Finance, and people in debt avoid places where their creditors are. Lee suddenly remembered the check he had received earlier. Taking it out of his pocket, he realized the issuer was Sag Garrow. The man read the name and explained that Lee had already had a customer who had ascended to heaven. He added that the issuer differed depending on who ascended, and that the person must have been good. It dawned on Lee that the boy who had visited earlier was a ghost. The man explained further that Sag Garrow was the wealthiest philanthropist in the underworld. Intrigued, Lee asked if there was money in the afterlife. The man confirmed, explaining that JS Finance managed it, though the currency was different. In the underworld, money could be used to reduce sins, functioning similarly to earthly transactions. Lee, puzzled, asked if everyone had money when they died. The man affirmed, stating that everyone had an account at JS Finance from the moment they were born. He explained that doing good deeds increased one's balance, while bad deeds decreased it. In other words, if you had a lot of money in the underworld, it meant you lived a good life. No money meant you had sinned a lot. Lee then asked if people could check their accounts while they were alive. The man shook his head, saying it wasn't possible. However, he reassured Lee that as long as he managed the restaurant well, he would always have plenty of money. The people who had run the place before him had all become VIPs in the underworld. Finally, the man added that it was impossible to exchange earthly money for underworld currency, but the reverse was possible. Without further hesitation, Lee asked him to transfer the money to his JS account, which the man accepted. Just then, a piece of equipment fell to the ground, reminding Lee of the lottery number the blonde had given him earlier. The prize was 50,000 won, and he considered donating it if he won first place to accumulate merit. But then he realized the amount was exactly what was on the check. Back in the restaurant, the women were gossiping about the lottery, and the blonde commented that she hadn't expected to win. She joked that if she had known it would happen, she would have entered her nephew's dream. One of the girls exclaimed how cool that was, and Lee thought to himself that, at first, he had been terrified of the ghosts. But the more he paid attention, the more they seemed like ordinary people. Just then, a familiar customer entered the restaurant, and Lee welcomed her warmly. The woman asked him what he was looking at and ordered soju. Lee hurried to get it, noting that she looked older than before. Observing her closely, he deduced that she must have been quite old for a ghost. Feeling guilty about their last encounter, he bowed and apologized. The woman, amused, graciously accepted his apology. She then asked for his name, and Lee introduced himself as Lee Kang-jin. She inquired about his family, and he replied that he was from the Lee family of Da. The woman smiled, saying she knew his family well and had a good relationship with his grandparents. She introduced herself as So from the Divine Kim family and, in her position of debt, asked Lee to speak comfortably with her. Lee, still curious, asked how long she had been dead. But before answering, she warned him to never ask ghosts about their past, especially those who hadn't ascended to heaven. She explained that the ghosts who came here were ones who couldn't even enjoy the food offered during ancestral rites, so it was best not to bring up their history. Since Lee was a good person, she offered him this advice. Reflecting on her words, Lee thought there shouldn't be too many customers after all. But suddenly, someone asked if all the maiden ghosts had left. Lee replied that they had and invited the newcomer to sit and eat. In an instant, a crowd of people began entering the restaurant, all eager to eat. Lee was overwhelmed, apologizing as he tried to manage the flood of orders. Today's menu was fried pork with garlic and rice, but the customers complained that the last owner had made everything for them. Lee apologized, explaining that he hadn't been open long. Just then, a different figure stood out in the crowd. The man made his way into the kitchen, grabbing a knife and offering to help. "Now everyone can order whatever they want," the blonde man said confidently. Lee, surprised, wondered who the man was calling mother, but decided it was fine if he helped out. Soon, all the dishes were ready, and the blonde set aside a kimchi stew for himself. Lee thanked him for the assistance, admitting that he had barely survived the rush thanks to his help. The blonde replied that it was only natural to struggle the first time. Lee, still in shock, asked how the blonde had gotten so good at cooking. But before he could get an answer, more people entered, all demanding food. With only 30 minutes left until closing, Lee was about to speak when the blonde suggested they serve kimchi stew. The customers excitedly agreed, and the blonde assured Lee that they would eat quickly. As Lee approached the table with the stew, he recognized one of the men, Chen H. Lee introduced himself, asking if the man remembered him. He explained that Chen used to visit him at the orphanage every holiday. Chen seemed to understand but apologized, saying that ghosts lose their memories of their past lives. Lee, disheartened, struggled to process this and began recalling cherished memories. But the blonde intervened, demanding that Lee stop. He warned that it was dangerous to discuss life stories with ghosts, as they were made of resentment. Suddenly, a man in a suit stood up, cursing, saying that Lee had ruined the atmosphere. He explained that he had been fired from his job because of his manager. Another ghost chimed in, claiming he had saved hundreds of people, but had still become a ghost when he died. More ghosts began sharing their tragic stories, from a man who had flat feet and suffered an accident in the army to another who had been wrongfully attacked by gangsters. Lee, overwhelmed by the wave of confessions, thought back to something his hung had always said: justice is on the side of the weak. That's why he had become a policeman. Clenching his fist in anger, he seethed at the thought of the gangsters. The blonde, noticing Lee's tension, asked if he had eaten yet, suggesting they share a meal together since there wasn't much time left until 1 o'clock. Lee tried to say something about the customers, but the blonde cut him off, saying he would handle it. A short while later, the blonde tasted the soup and exclaimed excitedly that saju was the perfect pairing for kimchi stew. Lee, impressed, asked if the blonde was experienced in cooking because his skills were remarkable. The blonde, slightly embarrassed, admitted that he was still a novice in the business. Lee reassured him that he was very talented. The blonde thanked him, adding that he could do even better with more time and the right ingredients. Lee, reflecting on the man's skills, realized he could use the help. He tentatively asked if the blonde would consider working at the restaurant. The blonde, pleased and with nothing else to do, agreed, saying it would be a pleasure to work alongside Lee. He introduced himself as Baing Su. They discovered they were the same age and decided to speak casually. Lee was enthusiastic about the new partnership. As the clock ticked down to 1 a.m., the ghosts hurried to finish their drinks. After his drink, Lee's friend approached, apologizing for not remembering him. He reassured Lee that even though he was a ghost now, if anyone harmed him, Lee should call his name 3 times, and he would take care of it. As the clock struck 1 o'clock, Kong and all the ghosts vanished, leaving Lee alone. Lee placed his hand under the table, struggling to accept that his friend was gone. He wished he could ease his regret, but was unsure how to help. Crying, he expressed his gratitude for their meeting and promised to always prepare as much food as they wanted. Suddenly, 2 people entered the restaurant, asking if it was still open. Lee greeted them, saying it was. The already drunk men requested a serving of soju. One of them wondered how many glasses would constitute a serving, while the other insisted that if it wasn't enough to eat alone, it wasn't a serving. Lee, noting their inebriated state, thought they were clearly intoxicated. However, since it was after 1 a.m., they were probably just letting people in. The man pointed to the menu and sarcastically asked if that was all they had. Lee, slightly embarrassed, confirmed that it was. The older of the two men then ordered 2 servings of stir-fried pork with saju. Lee nodded and promised to bring it right away. Lee thought he had responded naturally, but if it was past 1 a.m., humans shouldn't be around. The cook delivered their orders and asked them to enjoy their meal. The older man took a bite and, surprised, exclaimed, "This is delicious," and asked if Lee had seasoned it himself. Lee confirmed he did. The man then asked if the menu changed every day or if he was planning to sell only this. Lee replied that he hadn't decided yet but could make whatever they desired. The man asked if he could have seaweed soup for lunch the next day and said he would make a reservation for 2. Lee accepted, and they finished their dishes, feeling very full. The older one nudged the other, saying, "Wake up! The substitute driver is outside." The drunk man, however, mumbled, "There's no right path. It's time to go home without regrets." They thanked Lee for the food, and he wished them a safe return. Curious, Lee discovered something in his book. Grandma Kim's seaweed soup recipe had a unique twist, adding much more flavor. He remembered his friend loved it and decided he'd prepare it just like that for the customer who made the reservation. Lee started cooking, following the recipe exactly, though he wondered why it was written that way. When he tasted it, he realized it was delicious. Grandma Kim's exclusive seaweed soup was complete. Just then, a woman entered his establishment, accompanied by the man who made the reservation. "Hello," the man greeted. The woman commented, "It's cool in here," and the man replied, "They must have turned on the air conditioning." Lee found this strange because he hadn't turned it on. The woman observed, "This place looks too worn out to be a restaurant in Gangnam." The man nudged her to focus on the food. Lee admitted that the interior design was a bit outdated and served the seaweed soup that had been ordered. As they ate, the woman asked if Lee had learned his cooking techniques in Angang. Lee shook his head and said he didn't know that place. The woman explained that it was her mother's hometown, and she remembered eating a lot of seaweed soup there when she was pregnant. She said, "This tastes just like my mother's." Lee found it fascinating, but mentioned he had never been there. She commented that he seemed young, but was clearly talented. The cook thanked her and asked if she would like the soup to be wrapped up for takeout, which made her happy and grateful. The man asked how the food was and if he had done a good job. The woman praised her husband for his knowledge of restaurants. Then, the man asked how much the dish cost, and Lee replied, "Pay whatever you want." The man jokingly asked if he could pay 1 won. His wife, worried, said, "That will attract wrongdoers looking for free meals." Lee knew she was right, but he also knew that if he broke the rules, he'd go back to his old apartment. The woman said she wanted to come back often and believed it wouldn't be bad if a base price was set. She handed Lee 15,000 won and thanked him for the service. Lee thought he would feel uneasy about receiving so much money, but it would actually be convenient if a price was set. He decided to consult his lawyer about it. Another time, a man was surprised to hear that Lee had started trading with the living. The man was one of the employees from before, who praised Lee for his entrepreneurial vision, noting that his mother had only sold to ghosts. Lee replied that he was glad he had the book because, without it, the restaurant would have been lost. The man asked if Lee was really that bad, and Lee explained that he only knew a few recipes. The other ghosts suggested he could ask them anything. Lee questioned the strange air conditioning case and if it had something to do with ghosts. The man confirmed, explaining that where many ghosts pass, the temperature drops as negative energy accumulates. The longer the contact, the more yin energy built up, and eventually, ghosts may be seen outside the store. A bit scared, Lee admitted, "I see ghosts every day." The man laughed, saying, "That's how real ghosts are. The ones outside are different from the ones you see." Lee grew curious and asked what they were like. The man promised Lee would know when he saw them. Our cook then asked one more thing. "Are you too human?" Lee laughed, saying, "You can't be ghosts, and even if you were, you're not scary." The men smiled and confirmed that they were, in fact, living people. Lee nods, understanding, but he has one more question. "How did people like you end up working here if you couldn't see ghosts?" They explained that they were orphans, and the mother had raised them. That's how they joined. When the mother was busy, the maiden ghost took care of them, which inspired them to do something related. Lee tried to piece things together, saying, "So, Lawyer Shen is the eldest son, Mr. Saju is the third, and Mr. Swang is the second." Swang interrupted, adding, "Yeah, and there's one more, Shin Sujo, our youngest, who works in interior design." Lee's face lit up. "Great. I'd like to change the interior of the store. I'll ask for his advice." Swang nodded and promised to call his brother. After a while, it was almost time to open the restaurant. Swang and his brother said their goodbyes, wishing Lee a good night. As they left, Lee thought about his one-meal restaurant, a place where both the living and the dead could come together. He realized it wasn't just a quirky idea, it was actually good. This was a place open to everyone. It was said to be the border between this world and the afterlife, and that felt absolutely correct. The next day, Shin visited, surprised by Lee's call. Lee seemed worried about his living customers. He confirmed, "I am, because when they come, it's only natural to ask for a price, and there's no mention of them in the contract." The lawyer pondered for a moment. Shin explained, "This restaurant isn't a place to make money. It's to serve those who are hungry. Do you really need to set a price? Even if people don't pay, something will still be deposited." Lee considered, "But if customers decide not to pay out of bad intentions, they're committing sins. I'm willing to accept whatever they give, but I might be tempting them to sin." This made Shin think deeply. "If that's how you feel, we may need more advice," he said. "There's no underworld law on this side." Lee commented, "Mrs. Kim is already dead." Shin asked, "Do you remember what her job was?" That's when it hit Lee. If Shin was an underworld lawyer, he must have connections. Shin made a quick phone call and hung up with a smirk. Lee asked what she said, and Shin, with a serious expression, replied, "Mother told me to solve it myself." Shin explained, "She said you just have to follow the existing rules." Lee realized Shin was messing with him, trying to make him nervous on purpose. Eventually, Lee went to the board and decided to set some basic prices for the restaurant. He thought this would help generate some extra income, and even if he didn't receive the inheritance, he would at least be able to pay his tuition fees. Suddenly, the phone rang. Someone from the department office was on the other end. Lee asked if it was about his tuition fees, but it wasn't. The caller explained something surprising. Lee had been accepted as an intern at Tech Wang Trading from September to December, with a monthly salary of 1.9 million won. At the reception, a man commented that an internship would look great on his resume and be a fantastic opportunity to earn money and develop skills. But Lee wondered how the restaurant would fare if he took the internship. After some thought, he declined, explaining he was already managing a restaurant. The director asked, "Do you own a business?" Lee replied, "I've just taken over for 5 years." The director probed, "And what will you do after 5 years?" Lee admitted he wasn't sure. The director suggested, "This internship is only for the last semester. After that, you won't get another chance. Shouldn't you seize the opportunity for your future?" Lee left, thinking. The restaurant's hours were from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., so he'd probably finish work before 11 p.m. Maybe he could intern during the day. This was something Lee needed to think through carefully. Back at the restaurant, Lee delivered orders to customers while a drunk man made small talk, rambling on and on. Lee thought, he keeps saying what he wants and doesn't listen to anyone. The blonde-haired customer noticed his expression and asked if something had happened, handing him a drink. Lee replied, "I got an internship offer from a trading company." Panic spread throughout the restaurant as people imagined the one-meal restaurant closing down. The cook reassured them, "Calm down. Even if I accept, the restaurant will still open at the same time." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Most couldn't imagine life without the restaurant. A man approached Lee and asked, "Have you ever heard of Kang International?" He introduced himself as Park Truman, a founding member of Kang International. Lee was surprised, and the blonde remained suspicious. Park started listing several requirements to work in his field. Being puzzled, asked Lee, "Did you understand any of that?" Lee shrugged, "More or less." Just then, a noise came from the entrance. Bang assumed it must be a customer. A family of 3 appeared at the door, saying they heard they could eat there and asked if they could enter. Bang questioned what Lee was doing. Lee panicked, seeing that they were ghosts, which confused Bang because he was also a ghost. "It's different," Lee explained. "They're transparent." Bang clarified, "That's because they just died. The soul and body are still connected for 3 days after death. I was a half-ghost once too. But since they came here, it means no one is there to perform their funeral." Lee, curious, asked, "How do you know this?" Bang explained, "Usually, people stay at their own funeral for 3 days to eat, but they came straight to the restaurant. It's regrettable. Lee welcomed the family, saying they could order anything they liked. The woman suggested pork belly, as her daughter loved it. After the food was delivered, everyone gave their thanks. In the background, Lee asked Bang if he knew what would happen to these people. Bang explained, "In 3 days, a team will come to take them to the afterlife. Until then, they'll wander through places where they had memories." Lee, intrigued, asked, "Why didn't you go to the afterlife? Didn't they come for you?" Bang replied, "It's because of my resentment." He asked Lee if he had ever had any regrets in life. Lee affirmed, "Plenty." Bang continued, "Everyone has regrets, but when these feelings turn bitter, they become ghosts. They know they need to resolve them to ascend to heaven. The problem is they can't remember what their resentment was about. In the end, they just wander this cold, hungry world with no promise of peace." Lee realized that, like Bang, all the ghosts there probably had some unresolved resentment. The boy who came on the first day went to heaven after eating his food, so it probably helped resolve his regrets. But he wondered if he could help release the resentment of other ghosts. The family thanked him for the food and mentioned they could pay with their card, which Lee confirmed. The man asked if Lee knew what kind of place the Underworld was, explaining it was their first time there. Lee admitted he didn't know because he was still alive. The woman was startled, questioning how a living person could serve food to ghosts. Lee also had no idea how to explain. The fact that the cook was human sparked a hushed conversation between the spouses. The husband, a bit embarrassed, decided to ask Lee for a favor. "We have no family or relatives, and everything we had is probably going back to the state. Could you help us ensure that our money goes to the children we sponsored? We promised to pay for their school tuition." He added that it wasn't much, but if Lee could help, he'd be grateful. Lee hesitated, admitting he wasn't sure how to do this, but he knew lawyer Shin, who had studied this area. Shin soon arrived and introduced the manager of GS Finance, asking if Lee had met him before. Panic spread through the restaurant upon seeing someone from a finance company, but the manager reassured everyone, "I'm not here to collect debts. Please, eat at ease." Lee thought it was true everyone had debts, but he didn't expect such a strong reaction. Shin addressed the father of the family. "I can act as a legal representative, but the cost is 20 million won." The man looked dismayed. He didn't have that much. The GS Finance employee explained further, "Both you and your wife are VIP clients. GS Finance has been paying attention to you. Since you donated a certain amount every month to the children, your balance with the company is 60 million won." Shin intervened, "That's more than enough to hire me." The employee added, "This amount will continue to accumulate in your accounts. Even in the underworld, you'll need money." The child's parents became emotional and grateful. The man, however, insisted, "It's okay. This value is due to our good actions." Lee understood that good deeds always come back, even if they arrive late. Bang interrupted. "Hey, what are you doing? It's almost 1 o'clock, Lee replied. "I'm on my way," thinking how sad it was that they died but glad they were rewarded. The weather was nice, and Lee couldn't believe he had to work on such a day. Now that he'd taken out the trash, it was just a matter of folding the boxes and finishing the recycling. But then something caught his eye, a group of terrifying ghosts standing right in the middle of the street. Lee panics at what he saw and screams. As he falls unconscious, a few voices converse. One man says he doesn't want to wake him up, while another suggests that in moments like this, they should press an acupuncture point. Moments later, Lee begins to open his eyes, surrounded by a group of familiar faces. Trembling with fear, he explains that there were ghosts outside, and they weren't like the usual ones. They were practically see-through, and he could even see their bones. The three figures look at each other and explain that the ghosts he saw were actually them. Confused, Lee asks what they mean by that, pointing out that they didn't even have a scratch on them. Bang clarifies, "What you saw outside is how we really look, the way we did when we died. Here, we appear as we did before we passed." Lee, horrified at the thought, mutters, "I didn't know bodies could be that ruined." Overwhelmed, he bolts to the bathroom and throws up. After returning from the bathroom, Lee, still shaken, asks why they are there so early, as it's still hours before the restaurant opens at 11 p.m. Bang chuckles and asks, "Do you think we have anywhere else to go?" He explains that the ghosts are always waiting outside before the store opens. Lee just couldn't see them before. Lee nervously inquires if they have ever been to his room. Bang replies, "Not only do I not want to, but I would also need your permission to enter." Suddenly, one of the ghosts approaches Lee, performing a precise checkup on him, which leaves him confused. The ghost then introduces himself as Heeman Wook, the greatest doctor of the 21st century who claims he would have won a Nobel Prize if he had lived a little longer. Heeman explains that Lee keeps getting startled because his heart is weak and teaches him a method to calm down. Lee tries the technique, saying, "I think I'm calming down, but I'm not so sure." Heeman then begins a session of special medicinal movements, leaving Lee feeling deeply relaxed. After the session ends, Heeman warns, "This is great for the body," but Lee is so relaxed he didn't even hear the name of the Chinese bush clover used in the session. Curious, Lee asks about the herb's benefits, and Heeman excitedly suggests they visit the market to find some. Lee hesitates, explaining that he has nothing to buy today and needs to open the restaurant soon. Heeman, feeling a bit downcast, mutters, "It's okay, I get it." Lee sighs and decides to go to the market with him. At the market, Heeman is thrilled, snooping around the various stalls like a kid in a candy store. Lee smiles, glad he decided to come. He begins searching for the Chinese bush clover that Heeman recommended, but suddenly, a scream cuts through the air. A woman cries out for help, saying something is wrong with her baby. Lee immediately thinks she might be a ghost, especially when she starts wailing for her husband. But as he gets closer, he realizes the baby is having a seizure. Lee quickly tells the woman he'll call 119, but she catches him staring at her and snaps, "Can you see me?" She glares at him with a strange, almost psychotic look and lunges at him, screaming. However, contrary to what Lee feared, she's actually begging for help for her baby. People around them begin to panic, whispering about the baby's condition and wondering what will happen if he doesn't get help. Lee attempts to comfort the woman, saying he'll call 911, but Heeman warns that at this rate, it might be too late. The blood flow will be blocked, and the whole body could become paralyzed. If we don't act fast, he might lose the ability to move forever. The woman pleads desperately, "Are you a doctor? Please, do something." Heeman admits that he cannot possess the child to help. It's too risky. Then, the two ghosts look at Lee. He stammers, "Why are you looking at me like that?" But before he can finish, he finds himself thrust into the role of the doctor. Heeman begins to instruct Lee on what to do. "I can't do this," Lee protests. "If something goes wrong, it'll be on me," Heeman insists. "I could only touch you because of the energy in the restaurant. Trust me and follow my instructions." The crowd watches in awe as Lee, under Heeman's guidance, starts to use acupuncture on the child. Gradually, the paralysis diminishes and the child's eyes slowly return to normal. For a brief moment, the child sees a vision of his mother. Just then, the ambulance arrives. The paramedics ask questions, quickly assessing the situation and transferring the child to the hospital. Heeman explains, "We performed first aid. He should be fine once he reaches the hospital." The woman, relieved, gently touches Lee's arm and says, "My son's been weak since birth. I always feared something like this would happen." Lee, still dazed from everything that happened, nods in understanding. Well, he thinks to himself, I guess running a restaurant for both the living and the dead comes with some unexpected emergencies. But now, she says she feels at ease, ready to ascend to heaven, leaving Lee surprised and Hyun deep in thought. Outside, customers ask if it's time to open yet, and Lee affirms there are still 10 minutes left. The ghosts loiter outside, complaining of hunger. Suddenly, a heavy atmosphere fills the air, as if a war is approaching, making the ghosts feel an ominous energy. One ghost's feet are wrapped in blood. Finally, the clock strikes 11 o'clock. Lee opens the gate, announcing the restaurant is ready to welcome guests. But to his surprise, people start leaving. Curious, Lee asks a passerby why everyone is leaving, and they point out a figure, saying they'll return later because that person is coming. Just then, a blood-covered knife falls to the floor, and Lee notices a terrifying ghost at the end of the street. He recognizes her as Mrs. So, in turn, asks if Lee can see her. He confirms that he's been able to see ghosts for a few days now and invites her into his restaurant. She sits at a table, and Lee, ever the good host, asks for her order. So requests soju, as always. Fetching the soju, Lee ponders why all the other ghosts seem so afraid of the maiden ghost, wondering what makes her different. Even though she's older, she's always alone. Lee tries to call out to her, but decides against prying, thinking there must be a personal reason he shouldn't interfere with. On his first day of internship, Lee feels nostalgic as he dons his suit, praying to the heavens not to mess up. As he arrives, a man greets him, not expecting much from interns, and tells Lee to sit and wait for his assignment. Lee sits down, waiting, and starts overhearing the conversations of his busy colleagues. He silently prays for someone to give him something to do. Luckily, a friendly colleague, Sang-Sub, introduces himself, mentioning that Lee graduated in psychology from Seoul Theological University. Curious, Sang asks Lee if he can guess what he's thinking. Lee, confused, doesn't quite get the joke. Sang continues, teasing that psychology is for rich kids who don't do much, saying he envies him. He jokingly suggests that if Lee can't work, he could always open a counseling center. Still bewildered, Lee listens as Sang greets another intern, Mr. Choi, a top student from the International Relations Department. Sang, also a top student himself, encourages them both to do their best in this company. Sang assigns them a simple sorting task, and Lee, already tired despite having just started, forces himself to accept that this is normal. As he gets to work, a senior recognizes him, commenting, "Aren't you the owner of that one-meal restaurant?" Lee explains that, yes, he's the owner, but today he's here as an intern. Curious, Choi asks why he's doing an internship when he owns a restaurant. Lee explains he's been the owner for only 5 years. Sang finds his story interesting, especially since Lee has such varied skills. Later, as the workday winds down, Lee presents a list of stock logistics and warehouse conditions, along with an import-export declaration. A woman reviews it, complimenting him on the detailed data and giving him a nod of approval. She tells him he's done for the day, and Lee happily leaves, while Sang reminisces about his own intern days when he wouldn't have dared leave on time. The manager praises Lee's diligence and skill on his first day, while Sang can't help but admire his sense. Meanwhile, Lee reflects that organizing Mr. Chun's tasks earlier had really paid off. Suddenly, someone calls out to Donna, reminding him to copy the data from the morning task. Lee watches, noting that although Donna seems anxious due to his standout reputation, he's actually a bit slow and often makes mistakes. Later, Lee accompanies an old man to a restaurant, where they plan to eat his favorite dried soup. The place is adorned with photos of the former president and signed posters of idols and actors, a clear sign of quality. But when the food arrives, Lee notices that the restaurant owner is in a terrible state and wonders why she hasn't turned into a ghost yet. The soup tastes off. The old man apologizes, saying it used to be better. As they finish and prepare to leave, Lee observes the ailing owner. A customer comments that the restaurant used to be run by an elderly lady, and ever since she passed away, the quality has declined. Back at his own restaurant, Lee wonders why the son didn't inherit the recipe for their famed soup. As they talk about the preparation, Lee is puzzled by something Ba says, "If garlic is cooked, they will come." Who will come? Lee wonders, and then it hits him the maiden ghosts. Lee asks Ba why he's so afraid, given that he's also a ghost. Ba explains that Lee will understand only when he becomes one. Lee comments that he's also scared of Mr. Kang, calling Ba a coward. Embarrassed, Ba mutters that it's because of the debt. It's not normal for a ghost to owe money, let alone earn it. He explains that he's lucky to work there and earn a bit. But if the debt isn't paid off and the negative balance continues, GS Finance will come for them. If caught, they'll have to present documents at the bank counter for a term extension, and the line is long and slow. Fail the exam and you're extinguished. In this world, death and extinction might seem similar, but they're vastly different. Death is just the beginning of a new chapter, but extinction means the complete disappearance of body and soul. With this in mind, Lee understands that his friend must solve this debt issue quickly to avoid such a fate. However, Ba warns that ghosts don't understand resentment, which stresses him out even more. Lee apologizes, but Ba brushes it off, saying he wasn't sharing the story for sympathy. After this intense confession, Ba decides to leave for a bit as it's getting late. Lee asks where he's going but gets no answer. Meanwhile, the restaurant hasn't had many customers since Park Ch-man arrived, making Lee worry about the future. He realizes that without help, all the work is falling on him, and he can't keep up. Silently, he apologizes to Ba in his mind, hoping he returns soon. Just as Lee is feeling overwhelmed, Ba finally shows up with someone else in tow and asks why there are so many customers. Lee, exhausted, jokingly asks where his assistant has been, thinking he might die from all the cooking and serving. Meanwhile, a new customer arrives, insisting they don't need help and just want to eat. From a distance, a woman watches the efficient service and comments that although the cook is younger than her son, he's already very skilled. Lee apologizes for the delay, but the lady doesn't mind and asks about the food. Lee reassures her that everything is ready and asks if she needs anything else to improve her earlier impression of the restaurant. Embarrassed, the woman requests a gunji hangover soup. Lee knows this dish will take a long time, but Ba reassures him. Ba quickly hands him a business card and tells him to buy a bowl from his store. Incredibly, Lee pulls out a VIP card from JS Finance, but since it's an Underworld card, they can't use it in physical stores, so they settle for conventional money instead. Lee worries the food might disappoint the woman, but Ba disagrees. This is precisely why the woman must eat. It's her chance to see for herself how bad things have gotten. After finally getting the soup, Lee observes it and realizes his nervousness was unfounded. Ba asks how the store was when Lee went there. He replies that there was another customer, indifferent and unlike the woman's son. As the woman eats the soup, she thinks the flavor is fading away, but it's still painful to eat. Feeling like a drink would help, Lee offers her saju, and she eagerly agrees, asking for 2 beers and glasses as well. Grabbing the bottles, the woman mentions that she's mixed saju and beer many times, even though it's been a while. She worries about her skills, but with a practiced technique, she produces a perfect blend. The first glass goes to the young chef, who, after taking a sip, exclaims with enthusiasm, "It's incredibly smooth." The woman beams, happy that her skills are still alive. She then asks if the remaining customers want a glass, and of course, no one refuses. Rolling up her sleeves, she announces she'll showcase her real skills later. In a more personal conversation, she reveals that her husband died when she was 25, leaving her to raise a son alone. She didn't want to rely on relatives, so she turned to her soup recipe. Nothing in life was easy. She fought with other restaurant owners who were jealous of her popularity, and she often cried in secret. Her soup was her lifeline. But now, her son has ruined it, turning her labor of love into something terrible. Hearing her story, Lee recalls how the once small hangover soup restaurant grew thanks to her dedication. Now, with her son in charge, it's a mess. Surprisingly, she asks Lee to ruin her own restaurant. Shocked, Lee is confused. She explains that while she's grateful the restaurant supported her son's education and marriage, she doesn't want to disappoint the customers. Ba then questions how they're supposed to ruin it. Though the taste has declined, there are still customers drawn by rumors. The woman insists it's simple. If there's a more delicious hangover soup, customers will choose that instead. She decides to teach Lee her original recipe from her younger days. In another part of town, a man asks desperately if Lee really plans to sell hangover soup. The manager knows Lee has skills, having tasted his food before, but wonders how he'll manage while working at the company. Lee explains he'll only sell the soup on weekends, making 60 portions a day. The manager thinks it's ambitious, but is curious about the plan. He even asks if he can make a reservation, securing a table for 3. Suddenly, a veteran calls out to Lee for the 3rd time, snapping him out of his thoughts. The veteran asks if Lee intends to become a full-time employee, a question that surprises him. The veteran explains that though interns from psychology departments tend to be overlooked, Lee's skills make him a priority. Lee is surprised, thinking another intern, D, would get the offer first. But it's clear the company values Lee's abilities. The veteran continues, saying that if Lee becomes a full-time employee, the restaurant might be abandoned. While a steady paycheck sounds appealing, Lee can't help but think about the ghosts that frequent his restaurant. They'll be completely forgotten if he leaves. The hero recalls what the lawyer said about the restaurant being the border between the underworld and the real world, a true restaurant of the afterlife, and the only place where wandering ghosts can fill their bellies. With this in mind, the veteran questions whether the restaurant is really that important, but he manages to understand the boy's motivations. Without delay, he asks if Don is busy. The boy promptly responds that he's not, as he just finished the report for Manager Park. Hearing this, the veteran tells Lee that he can continue with what he's doing, while he and the other intern will head out together. Lee remembers that interns who don't seem capable tend to be assigned more work. Reflecting on the veteran's treatment of him, Lee hopes everything goes well for the man, seeing how hard he works. Later, back at the restaurant, the recipe for the hangover soup is passed on to Lee. The dish before him is Grandma's famous beef blood hangover soup, very different from the version her son makes. The smell is already incredible, but when Lee takes a taste, he's blown away by the rich, spicy flavor. He comments that, though it's meant to be a hangover soup, the taste makes you want to drink more alcohol. The lady laughs and explains that the soup serves multiple purposes to help you feel better while still indulging. Lee gets it immediately and starts preparing an appetizer to go with the soup. The first customer, who happens to be the company manager, starts eating. Alongside him are manager Park from the trade team and Yu from commercial marketing, both equally impressed by the quality of the food. Despite the rave reviews, they still don't understand why the restaurant isn't packed with customers. Lee explains that today is the first day they've started selling the hangover soup, which explains the lack of traffic. But something tells him that won't be the case for long. Park asks if the hero didn't invite senior manager Jum, but Lee explains that, for now, he only wants to serve the regular managers. He knows that this hangover soup isn't being sold to make money, it's a ploy to ruin Ms. Oh-sun Young's restaurant. Rumors won't spread if he keeps it within the company, but if word of mouth reaches real customers, it's only a matter of time before things escalate. Returning to his content expression, Lee clarifies that, since the restaurant is separate from the company, he thought it would be better if only those in the know came. One of the workers agrees, noting it would be awkward if too many company people showed up. Sun Young, having witnessed the whole exchange, praises both the hero and his bosses. The managers leave, happy with the meal and eager to return soon. Outside the restaurant, a boy tells his friend that the place next door sells beef blood hangover soup, and he's willing to give it a shot. However, the friend insists they should try the more traditional restaurant down the street. They enter the lady's shop, are greeted by her son, and quickly receive their food. But the moment they taste it, regret hits them hard. They leave without finishing, complaining about the awful taste and realizing the restaurant's reputation no longer matches its quality. A man observes all this quietly. Later, the lady's son asks what his father is doing outside, as his wife has been calling him. The man brushes it off, crushing the newspaper in his hands, and mutters with a serious face, "Seems like there are flies buzzing around." Back at the company, a man mentions he overheard manager Lee talking about the new dish at the boys' restaurant. Upset that he wasn't told sooner, he vents. However, the hero doesn't think discussing this at work is appropriate. The chief manager jumps in, saying he also wants to eat there. The boy explains that they only sell 60 portions a day, but there are still 8 left for Sunday. The senior reserves 5, while a girl snags 3, leaving the veteran without a spot. He asks if he can at least have 1 bowl, but the boy reiterates they only serve limited portions. The senior even tries to offer 40 for a reservation, but the boy refuses. Meanwhile, others drive the bidding up to 60, leaving the veteran completely confused. As reservations for the following week start pouring in, the boy is busy copying materials for the next meeting. S takes the opportunity to thank him, but also throws in a little jab about doing it correctly. The hero, realizing he should probably finish his own tasks, follows Donga and asks if they can work together. Donga refuses, venting his frustrations, claiming Lee doesn't take the internship seriously. He warns that the restaurant has caught the manager's interest, but he should be careful, as their final evaluations are approaching. After this disagreement, Lee knows Donga is right. He has no intention of becoming a regular employee. He's only able to work here because of Chung Man's help, which may have rubbed people the wrong way. Still, the words of a former employee echo in his mind, "There's nothing wrong with being smart." Yet, Lee feels uneasy. Later at the restaurant, someone arrives with a reservation for 2 portions of hangover soup. Lee welcomes them, offering a fresh kimchi refill. The company employees taste the soup and, despite not usually liking beef blood, find it incredible. One of them comments that the soup tastes similar to the one from the other restaurant, but his colleague insists this one is much better. Lee shares with the recipe's creator that everything is going according to plan. Suan, however, feels it's only a matter of time before her son's business collapses. Meanwhile, at the ladies' restaurant, the cook's wife notices fewer customers. He explains it's because people don't like beef blood as much anymore. Just then, some customers walk in, and he eagerly greets them. However, the blonde customer quickly realizes they're in the wrong place and apologizes, vowing to come back another time. Frustrated, the cook's wife asks if there's a nearby restaurant that serves hangover soup. To her dismay, there is. The man rushes out, and his wife, annoyed, wonders how much longer they'll watch their competitors steal their customers. Back at the hero's restaurant, he preps the soup with the help of the recipe's creator. Meanwhile, the man from the other restaurant wants to see firsthand how well his competitor handles the hangover soup business. During weekdays, the hero works from 9 am to 6 pm, then opens the restaurant for ghosts from 11 pm to 1 am on weekends. He serves the living alongside Miss Young. Facing the soup, the hero admits he's been working hard, but is feeling discouraged by the rough times. The blonde suggests bringing in another helper, But Lee sighs, explaining that the real problem is working alone on weekends. He's considering hiring someone living to help during the weekends, even if it's just for a short period. However, he explains that spending too much time among ghosts turns a person into one of them. It's not just a simple job for someone who comes in, works, and leaves. By working there, an employee absorbs the negative energy of the place, and inevitably, they'll start seeing the ghosts outside the restaurant as well. Even for someone like the hero, who's used to dealing with spirits, it's still surprising at times. For a regular person, this would be a massive shock. In the end, Lee knows the only one who can handle this kind of work is him, alongside his part-time colleague. After the meal, one of the big names at Lee's company asks for some saju, which is promptly prepared. The lady ghost helps the protagonist pick out the best brand, suggesting one with clear packaging. Unexpectedly, without specifying his preference, the man loves the drink Lee chose. Meanwhile, the couple from the meat restaurant prefers fish cakes as a side dish, so the hero quickly brings that out. The convenience store owner, known for sprinkling extra black pepper on his food, also gets his dish exactly how he likes it. Despite being a ghost, Sunam still remembers all the customers' tastes, a testament to how much her hangover soup restaurant meant to her. Later, someone arrives asking if there's still beef blood hangover soup available. They're told a reservation is necessary. Upon hearing this, the lady becomes sad, asking what Han-soo is doing there. It turns out the man standing before them is her son, accompanied by his wife. The hero, seeing how emotional the moment is, offers them a seat and prepares their order, as there are still 2 bowls left for the day. The protagonist had anticipated this day and had prepared extra. While making the soup, Sun advises Lee to add a little more sugar to her son's bowl. The girl helping questions if that won't make it too sweet, but the lady insists she knows her son's tastes. When the dishes arrive, the first to taste the soup is the cook's wife. As soon as she does, she realizes this isn't just any soup. Han-soo takes a bite next, and his reaction is even stronger. The ghostly cook becomes nervous as Hans quickly finishes his bowl, savoring every bite. Afterward, he asks if the chef knew his mother. Leah, trying to play it cool, glances at the ghostly lady but doesn't reveal too much. Hans begins telling the story of his mother, who was the owner of a famous hangover soup restaurant, now passed away. Listening, Lee offers him a drink and admits that he knows her well. As the conversation continues, Hans notices how Lee pours the drink, a technique his mother used. He then understands that Lee must have learned this from her. The wife, however, interrupts, questioning whether Lee has any conscience since her mother-in-law's restaurant still serves the same dish. Lee simply asks if he's done something wrong, which infuriates her. She claims that the original hangover soup already exists in the neighborhood, made by her late mother-in-law. But Lee counters by asking if it's truly the same, even when sold by him. This only angers her more, but her husband calms her down, admitting the cook isn't wrong. Hans recalls his mother's daily routine, waking up early to prepare the broth, chop ingredients, and boil the beef blood. He sympathizes with Lee, knowing how exhausting it is to maintain that level of dedication. Lee, however, is more interested in hearing about the promise Hans made to his mother. Hans reveals that his mother never used instant broth and had been making the soup by hand for nearly 50 years. He points out a phrase that used to hang in the shop: "Delicious hangover soup is made with good ingredients and sincerity." But in a moment of weakness, Hans broke the promise to his mother, leading to the decline of the business. Both Hans' wife and the spirit of his mother comfort him, and at that moment, Lee reveals his true reason for selling the hangover soup: to ruin the children's shop, out of respect for the original owner. This revelation shocks Hans and his wife. Lee then asks how the soup tastes, and Hans admits that it's delicious. Lee follows up by asking if Hans believes his restaurant could serve a better hangover soup than the other one. Deep in thought, Hans reflects on his mother's legacy and recalls her final request that her son continue sharing her beloved recipe with others. Smiling after finishing his drink, Hans tells Lee that he won't be able to ruin them because the restaurant will soon be back in full swing. With everyone feeling satisfied with how things turned out, Hans and his wife leave, thanking Lee for the meal. As they depart, the ghostly lady asks to speak with Chef Lee. Apparently, there's something she wants to do. Lee tells her that if she plans to leave, she should visit him one last time before she goes, though she doesn't seem to understand just yet. A few days later, the restaurant is thoroughly cleaned and lunch has been prepared. The next task is washing the mountain of dishes from the day's service. As Lee prepares for dinner, he remembers an old saying, If Ba's name is called 3 times, he will appear to help in critical situations. Thinking it over, Lee decides to try it out, performing the ritual and calling Ba's name 3 times. To his amazement, Ba manifests from the shadows, though clearly annoyed. He taught Lee the technique as a courtesy and didn't expect him to actually use it. Ba threatens to leave if Lee isn't busy, but Lee assures him it's urgent and asks if Ba has other commitments. Ba, irritated, explains that he was just watching the Hangover soup restaurant, noting that the couple there seemed anxious to show the original taste of the soup. Lee, sensing things are going according to plan, believes that Sun will be pleased. Changing the subject, Lee asks if Ba has remembered anything about his own past, suggesting it might be time for him to ascend. However, the assistant didn't remember anything and asked if the reason for his summoning was really just for that. Lee denied it, saying that if there's a place his companion wants to go, they should go together. But before that, he asked Ba to help him by washing some dishes. Rolling up his sleeves, the blonde agreed, but asked if there weren't any other ghosts around to help. Lee responded that there weren't. So, the blonde got to work. After getting the new knife, the hero asked why his colleague was staring at it so intently. The blonde explained that it had been years since he last held his own knife, and it felt great. Lee, on the other hand, found that a bit sad. Without wasting time, Boss grew curious to see what the cook had bought for himself, since he hadn't shown anyone when asked, leaving the boy embarrassed. Lee recalled that his colleague had been watching the Hangover soup, so to ease the tension, he tried sending him back. He explained that they no longer sold Hangover soup, and while dismissing his helper, the item he bought remained hidden in his pocket. Later, as the protagonist continued preparing dinner, he chopped many ingredients and tossed them into the frying pan. Finally, the food was ready and served on magnificent plates, though Lee wasn't sure if it was enough. He called out for Kim So E 3 times to summon her. After a few attempts, she appeared late, but far more terrifying than usual, and clearly irritated by the summoning. Upon seeing her spirit, Lee jumped back in fear, which only made Kim more upset. As Lee trembled, he thought anyone would be scared witnessing something like this and offered to serve her some food. Kim sarcastically asked if she looked like a ghost who was obsessed with food. Realizing he offended her, Lee quickly apologized and said he would clean up what he prepared. Despite her irritation, Kim was clearly just being difficult and eventually admitted that she wouldn't mind eating, since his apologies seemed genuine. Lee hurried to prepare something, but Kim abruptly refused, explaining that she had to arrive at the designated time like any other customer. With that, she left, promising to return at 11 o'clock. When 11 o'clock finally arrived, the hero handed her a drink. After tasting it, Kim noted that the mix of soju and beer wasn't bad. Lee smiled, thinking he had nailed it, but Kim coolly remarked that it wasn't the best drink she'd ever had. Curious, Lee asked what her favorite drink was, but Kim mysteriously replied that he'd get a chance to try it one day. Her vague answer only piqued his curiosity more. Distracted by his thoughts, Lee accidentally dropped something on the floor and quickly picked it up when alerted. Kim noticed his distraction and asked why he seemed so out of it. Lee then revealed the item he bought, explaining it was a gift for Kim to make up for his past mistakes. Feeling a bit embarrassed, he admitted it wasn't very expensive. Kim, however, thought it was a nice gesture. When she opened it, she found a norigi traditional Korean ornament, and Lee explained that he thought it would look good on her. Looking more closely, Kim commented that it was the first time in 400 years she had received something from someone. Surprised, Lee asked if that meant it was her first gift since death. Kim explained that she had received gifts before, but they were from shamans who wanted to gain power through her. Though she helped those in genuine need, she refused others for her own reasons. She shared that it had been a long time since she felt like she was actually communicating with people, having spent so much time alone as a ghost. Even though she was a powerful warrior, strong enough to be summoned by shamans, she had endured 400 years in solitude, raising the question of what resentment kept her tethered to this world for so long. After eating, Kim thanked Lee for the food and prepared to leave. She explained that if she stayed too long, other ghosts wouldn't be able to come to the restaurant. Lee, however, believed other ghosts would inevitably come anyway. Smiling, he invited Kim to come back anytime, day or night. Kim, observing his boldness, gave no immediate reaction, but just before leaving, she accepted his offer with a slight smile, assuring him she'd visit whenever she had the chance. Later, at the restaurant, the group of girls from earlier commented on the lingering energy from the last customer Kim that still seemed to fill the space. They chatted casually, but Lee decided to weigh in, saying that Kim wasn't so scary to talk to. The girl, however, explained that Kim was instinctively a leader, like how a dog can't pass in front of a caged lion. They reminded Lee that all ghosts were different, and many had unresolved issues from their lives. Suddenly, another customer arrived, and the protagonist greeted him with his usual politeness. But this customer wasn't ordinary. He fell to his knees, making a scene and knocking over a chair. As Lee asked if he was okay, the man, recovering from his fall, felt embarrassed but quickly moved on. Without missing a beat, he began harassing one of the girls, offering to buy her a drink. When she brushed him off, he complained that she was playing hard to get, clearly unaware that she was ready to throw hands. At that moment, another strange figure, Duchi, entered the scene. Since the employee was with the man, he apologized for the commotion caused. Apparently, this man hasn't been dead for very long because he's still unaware of his, condition. So, the employee from JS Finances thought it would be a good idea to bring him to the restaurant. It's said that this man was a highly valuable customer who took out many loans with them, which forces them to tolerate him. However, just as the protagonist was about to say something, a physical conflict between the two guests broke out. One of them smashed a bottle over the boy's head, and the woman sarcastically said she was celebrating his first day, asking if he felt grateful. In response to this insult, the customer lunged at the woman, furious. Before the boy could do anything reckless, the protagonist intervened and asked his customer to calm down. Meanwhile, the JS Finances employee tried to calm the woman down, who, despite not starting the fight, was still provoking. After the dust settled, Dewey, the employee, approached his customer with a smile and asked the chef for a glass of water for the boy. Of course, this only made the boy angrier. He was being restrained by a random person and snapped, "Do you even know who I am?" Without missing a beat, the JS Finances employee leaned on the chair with a clipboard in hand, saying, "I know you very well." The troublesome boy is revealed to be the third son of the home group, a 33-year-old man and, supposedly, an excellent bank customer. The boy began boasting, but it was then revealed that his balance was minus 1.475 billion. Goyang, clearly perplexed, questioned this absurd amount, but he was told that this was his story at the bank and that the Underworld bank works a bit differently. Hearing this, the customers were shocked at the debt, wondering if the boy was some sort of serial killer to be in such a state. When the water arrived, an indignant Goyang asserted that he wouldn't be fooled by a third-rate financial bank he'd never heard of. Dewey, unfazed, simply asked the boy to calm down and drink the water so he could sign the document. However, the boy, believing it was a scam, threw everything into the air and questioned how such a low-quality bank dared try to deceive him. The JS Finances employee, however, simply bowed his head and asked the boy to take the document again. At this point, Goyang explained that he knew it was a scam because he used to subdue people by force too. He believed the man in front of him wasn't a banker, but rather a gangster. Despite this, Dewey, still on duty, was beginning to lose patience. He handed over the document, and the boy reluctantly accepted, though he continued to complain that the man could have just done it himself. Witnessing this, Lee, our hero, remarked that he'd never seen Mr. Dewey so angry. When he asked about the document, he was told that it was a loan certificate. However, even though it wasn't signed by a millionaire, Lee thought Dewey had every right to be upset, given the boy's attitude. Recalling the man's behavior and that he was drunk when he died, the girl asked if the chef had realized the boy didn't know he was dead yet. With a laugh, she explained that the guy was just now discovering it. To clarify, the JS Finances employee asked the boy to take a look at the contents of the loan certificate for liability due to death while driving intoxicated. He then reminded him that he may not remember, but after drinking and changing lanes, he collided with a car coming from the opposite direction. As a result, both the other driver and he died, meaning the boy now had to pay the settlement amount to the other party. Upon hearing this, the boy was shocked, exclaiming it was an accident and that he didn't mean to kill anyone. However, Dewey reminded him that, in the underworld, a sin is a sin, and unlike in the living world, apologies won't cut it. The JS Finances employee then asked if the boy felt more secure now, pointing out that his actions had involved an innocent person, and he would now have to pay the price in Underworld currency. After verifying the documents, the next step was to place his thumb on the signature line beside his name. He would then be guided to the next stage, a 3-day funeral. When it was over, the JS immigration officer would come and escort him to the afterlife. Even more distressed, Goyang asked what would happen next. Dewey explained that the boy's sin wasn't just financial, it was physical. The tears of those he wronged would suffocate his breath, and the pain they felt would sever his limbs. At that moment, Goyang experienced a despair he had never felt before, but it was too late. He had already signed the document. With that, Dewey thanked him, while the boy continued to try to deny reality. In response, the Jae's employee casually asked if the boy thought it appropriate for the guests to be present without the host. Without further delay, he called Gown to go straight to the funeral home. Later, outside the restaurant, the protagonist closed the gate. After some time, a distant voice shouted, asking if they were already closed. Our hero confirmed, adding with a hint of sarcasm that he did a good job even without his helper. Hearing this, the spirit of Mrs. Sunyoung appeared, striking up a conversation, and was promptly greeted by the two. She explained she had been sitting next to her precious son, watching him hold the ladle confidently, trying his best to cook just like before. With a smile, she invited the chef to come to her restaurant sometime to try a bowl of soup and evaluate it. The protagonist commented that it seemed the lady's anger had been relieved. However, Bod disagreed, saying it had only been a few days, and in his opinion, the cook would probably give up very soon. Mrs. Sunyoung didn't take the comment positively. The blonde woman questioned whether just that small action was enough to make her stay by her son's side. Lee Mem-haran unexpectedly agreed with her, which left the assistant a bit confused. To explain, he stated that the couple's eyes conveyed a real determination, as if they were saying they knew they were doing something wrong and needed someone to scold them. Eyes that seemed to beg for someone to tell them there was still salvation. That's what Lee felt when he looked into them. With that, the hero locked the gate to his restaurant and was thanked by the cook's spirit. Lee didn't believe he did anything grand, as he believed this wholeheartedly. Finally, with the restaurant matter settled, the boy had the idea for all of them to go together the next day for a meal. As he headed towards the restaurant, Lee passed by a pair of friends discussing the food. One of them was happy, saying his meal was much better than the first time. They realized they just had bad luck before. Others also mentioned how the quality had unexpectedly improved and began to think the young chef had returned to his roots. Even though he hadn't tried it yet, our hero already believed the answer was clear, but the lady thought he'd only know once he tried it. Outside the restaurant, a man carried his drunk friend, who questioned why he got even more drunk while trying to cure his hangover. His friend replied, "Because I'm happy. The original taste is back, and that deserves a celebration." His friend agreed, praising the chef for the food, which was getting better and better. The chef, much friendlier than before, thanked them kindly and promised to do his best to preserve the taste of his mother's food. Hearing this, the cook recalled memories of his past with his mother. While they ate together, she would always tell him to eat slowly despite his hunger, so he wouldn't choke. Embarrassed for always saying the same thing, Sunyoung had once wondered if she should change up her son's menu. But the boy quickly refused, continuing to eat normally. With a smile, he had told her that her handang liver soup was the most delicious in the world. Back in the present, after bidding farewell to the customers, the cook noticed Lee near the restaurant and shouted a greeting. Promptly, Lee responded, asking how the chef had been. The chef explained he was doing well, thanks to the boy. He then invited Lee to come inside and enjoy a dish, and with a smile, Lee accepted, requesting a bowl of hot hangover soup. Realizing the order was for the classic beef blood hangover soup, the cook invited the protagonist inside. He immediately began preparations with his wife, both working with extreme focus, just as they had before. The cook was clearly happy that everything was going well, and Mrs. Oath thanked him. In response, he thanked her even more for having taught him such a precious technique for free. With much of her resentment dissipating, the woman began to ascend to the heavens, crying and expressing her gratitude. She explained that her son was aging and already had wrinkles, so she couldn't help but worry. In response, our hero assured her that he would frequently check on her son's shop, and if the taste wasn't right, he would scold him again. For this reason, he asked Sunyoung to trust him with this responsibility so she could finally let go of her resentment. Having witnessed all the good her son had done, the woman stopped crying and accepted Lee's offer. Soon, she left the legacy of her life for Lee to oversee. With a clear conscience, she finally departed for the afterlife. Just as the lady was freed, a check fell to the ground in front of Lee. It was for 37,000 roos from Jae's finances. But when he thought about it, it seemed small compared to the legacy that woman left behind. Nevertheless, Lee looked up at the sky and thanked her, saying he would use the money with great gratitude. His farewell was interrupted when the cook appeared at the door, asking if Lee wasn't coming in to eat. With everything resolved, he finally went inside to enjoy his hangover soup. Inside the restaurant, Both the service and the atmosphere were truly pleasant. Not to mention, the food tasted like it had before, and Lee enjoyed every bite. Later, back at his job, the protagonist submitted a report but noticed some formatting errors. Fortunately, the person who received it didn't seem to notice and simply asked if there were any other questions. Relieved, Lee said there weren't and quickly left. However, something was bothering him. The office seemed very different from usual. Everyone was exercising, even the most sedentary ones, making the place resemble a gym. This sight impacted Lee more than the first time he saw a ghost. As he walked down the corridor, he encountered manager Lee, and the two greeted each other. The manager asked to make a reservation for the weekend, but Lee explained that the dish had been removed from the menu. While jumping rope, the manager regretted the decision, and Lee explained that if he wanted the soup, he should visit the original restaurant. The manager wasn't upset and decided to trust the cook's advice, planning to visit the other restaurant instead. As the manager walked away, Lee began to wonder if being around ghosts was starting to make him hallucinate. At that moment, the other intern appeared, telling Lee to move out of the way. Taking the opportunity, Lee commented on the odd state of the office. The intern asked if he hadn't checked the company's notice board. Without delay, Lee went to check for himself. To his surprise, there was indeed a sports event scheduled for Friday and Saturday. This made Lee very anxious. He wondered if he could skip the event, but knowing he was just an intern, he didn't think he could. He continued working normally, though visibly concerned. He knew that if he attended, he would have to leave the restaurant unattended. Later, on the building staircase, Lee took out his phone, knowing he'd have to resolve this with his superior. When his call was answered, the protagonist felt relieved. He asked about the message he'd sent, and the lawyer explained that he was already aware of the commitment that would keep the cook away from the restaurant for 2 days. Unexpectedly, the lawyer instructed Lee to attend the event, which left him very surprised. Without hesitation, the lawyer explained that he would send someone to replace the cook starting Friday night. However, Lee recalls that normal people would be frightened, but Shin quickly assures him it won't be a problem because the substitute will be his fourth brother. This reminds Lee that the brother is an interior designer, so he asks the lawyer if he can inquire about remodeling the restaurant's interior. Shin isn't sure if his brother will have time for that, but promises to ask, which Lee appreciates. Finally, the lawyer asks if the boy has anything else to discuss. Lee declines, thanking him and hanging up, now much more at ease. Just as he finishes the call, a girl walks by carrying some boxes and asks if Lee was talking to a client since he was speaking so politely. Lee confirms, then quickly changes the subject, offering to help her with the heavy boxes. Unexpectedly, she declines, saying that carrying heavy boxes counts as training for the upcoming sports event. This prompts Lee to comment on how much everyone seems to care about the event. The girl, surprised, asks if the intern isn't interested. Lee doesn't understand why she finds his lack of interest so shocking, so the girl explains that during the sports event, there's a competition to select the most popular employee, and the winner is promoted to a full-time position. She advises him to give his best at the event. After learning the motivations behind it, the protagonist reflects on the prize but realizes he doesn't have a strong opinion about it yet. He decides to stay quiet for now, aware that some of the other interns might want to cause trouble or harbor envy. It's exactly the kind of thing Dongdon is subjecting himself to. Later, in the cafeteria, a message arrives on the protagonist's phone. Upon checking, he sees it's from Shin Sujo, the man who will take care of the shop over the weekend. Lee thanks him for his help. Sujo mentions he also has something to discuss regarding the interior remodeling, and Lee confirms he's aware, having requested it himself. Sujo assures him there's no problem, and he's willing to renovate whatever the cook desires. Lee lists everything he needs, and the substitute informs him that the remodeling will proceed during the weekend. This brightens Lee's day, though he inevitably begins to worry about the cost. The renovation, although necessary, will surely cost him a fortune. Back at the office, some people pass by Lee, and a woman mentions that he's the one they've been talking about, the guy who runs a restaurant while also interning. A man in the group asks why he's working here when he already runs a restaurant in Gangnam. The woman doesn't know the answer but says she's determined to eat at his restaurant someday. She also mentions that Lee is good at his job, though she thinks he'll quit soon. Lee overhears everything they're discussing, but when his shift ends, he gets up without showing any emotion. He recalls what Dongdon said about not taking the internship too seriously, advising him not to be proud of temporary accomplishments. But Lee knows what's happening around him, he just pretends not to. The company employees aren't wrong. He does have to run the restaurant for 5 years, so he can't fully focus on his professional life. It's too much to manage both right now, so he questions why he's even attending an event like this. Is it because he doesn't want his professor's recommendation to go to waste? Or because he feels it's the only change he can experience? He even considers the woman's comment about being there just to attract more regular customers. Regardless, Lee follows the employees out of the building, feeling a bit of pity for the hardworking people around him. The next morning, the sports event begins. Some employees cheer for Team Sales No. 1, while Lee's team enthusiastically supports Team Export 2. Various tournaments take place, with the current one being a table tennis championship. Lee thinks the atmosphere is livelier than he expected, with his colleagues cheering loudly. But in the midst of all the excitement, he notices something: strange children. Yet, it's clear they're not alive. Though they seem to enjoy the event to some extent, Lee wonders where these little ones came from. Curious, he asks manager Kang, who is intently focused on the game, if there's ever been an accident at this academy. The manager explains that there was, about 6 years ago, in the event center's parking lot. The parking lot was later moved to the basement, but at the time, it was right next to the auditorium. There had been a car accident, and the victims were high school students. Some were injured, and others lost their lives. However, the driver wasn't blamed. Kang explained that the black box of a parked car recorded the brake light on, meaning the driver had been braking before the accident. Yet, the car didn't stop, which is why the driver was found innocent. Still, the public opinion didn't cool down, and the case made the news. People demanded a trial, but the outcome remained the same: the driver was innocent. It was a particularly tragic case since the driver was a high school teacher, and the students he hit were his own. There was no need for further condemnation. The man would live with the guilt for the rest of his life. Kang then asks why Lee is so curious all of a sudden. Lee realizes it's because he saw those same ghostly children at the tournament. In a certain restaurant, these ghostly children press their cheeks longingly against the glass, watching others eat, wishing they could taste the food. One of their friends tells them to stop looking, reminding them they won't be able to eat it anyway. But the girl, still full of hope, says, "Even if we can't eat it, I still want to try." Suddenly, our hero enters the hall with plates of food in hand. The ghosts comment among themselves, noticing that the other employees are eating on the other side, and wonder if this boy is alone to be eating in this area. Despite their curiosity, Lee is undeterred and says he brought the food for the children to eat. The ghosts, however, are confused. None of them understand who the boy is talking to, and they're puzzled by the fact that he's not accompanied by any friends. To clarify, the protagonist reiterates that he's speaking to the children and invites them to come and eat. Hearing this, the ghosts become very scared because, in theory, no one should be able to see them. This reaction is normal, but the hero is already used to it. He calmly calls them again to eat, and slowly, the children lose their fear. As they approach, they begin to eat, even though it's only their souls consuming the food. From a distance, Lee watches them and asks if the food is good. One of the children, though grateful, explains that it's not really good, because it only fills their bellies. There's no taste. Ghosts can only eat the soul of food outside a ghost restaurant, which explains the lack of flavor. Intrigued, Lee asks if they've ever heard of a place where ghosts can eat delicious meals. The children become fascinated by this idea, and Lee confirms that such a place truly exists. He's surprised that no other ghosts have told them about it. The little girl explains that they've never encountered any other ghosts in this place besides themselves. She also mentions that they can't leave the area, which makes Lee suspect that these children might be the poltergeist type. Despite this, the children are struck by the fact that the boy can see them. One of them asks if he's a shaman and wonders why he gave them food. Lee explains that his job is to feed ghosts, but they don't believe him, having seen him working in an office. Even so, the eldest child still trusts that, although it's strange, the man probably doesn't have bad intentions. One of the children steps forward and requests a favor. She asks the boy to contact their families, as they've never met anyone who could see them before. The child explains that their parents must be worried, and they still have the desire to comfort them. Hearing this, Lee asks the little girl if she really wants to tell her family. Another child jumps in, saying, "Of course, we've been stuck in this realm for 6 years." Lee understands their wishes but believes telling their families would only stir up more grief. He'd have to come up with some flimsy excuse like saying he found them wandering around, which could be very disrespectful to a family that's already mourned. So, the protagonist suggests a different approach. The child, frustrated, shouts that she knows it's his selfish desire, but cries out that they're trapped, unable to leave. She falls to the ground, overcome with emotions, crying that she understands the complications but has no one else to turn to. Faced with this heart-wrenching situation, Lee begins to wonder if there's truly a way to help these children. Unlike the ghosts he sees at the restaurant every weekend, these little ones seem much more unstable. He muses that, if they were at the restaurant, he could get help from the other ghosts, but he's certain those ghosts have already been through something like this. Feeling at a loss, Lee starts thinking about how ghosts can only eat in a specific restaurant. He's unsure if his plan will work, it's just a guess, but he decides to try. Lee asks if the children can only stay in the auditorium. The eldest explains that they can walk around a bit within the training center. Hearing this, Lee invites them to come with him. Naturally, this confuses the children. In response, Lee tightens his apron and, when the clock strikes 11 o'clock, declares that he's going to cook them some real food. After preparing the meal, the children dig in, finally tasting a well-prepared dish. They're overjoyed and thankful for Lee's kindness, savoring every bite. The girl advises her friends to eat everything because they don't know when they'll get to eat again. Initially, Lee worried that they wouldn't be able to eat since they weren't at the restaurant, but it seems that the key was mealtime. One of the children, touched by the boy's kindness, asks if he knows how they can leave this place. Sadly, Lee has no idea. The girl, however, isn't frustrated. She recalls that, although this is the first time they've met him, Lee has already done so much for them, cooking for them, no less. She says she wants to feel like a child again. Since she can't tell her parents about her situation, she asks Lee to help them leave the gymnasium. She explains that, because they're trapped, all they can think about is their parents. Lee acknowledges that they're right. Although he doesn't know much about ghosts, he figures that Mr. Sangi might know something unlike Ba, who probably wouldn't care. After finishing washing the dishes, Lee tells the children that perhaps Mr. Sangi can help. The children become anxious, already asking when he'll come and what kind of person he is. Lee describes him as the great veteran of the little ones. The kids glance at each other, unsure of who this person could be. Changing the subject, Lee asks for the children's names. The first girl introduces herself as Ji-Lun, the second as Liam, and the older boy as Young-Soo. As for himself, the protagonist introduces himself and asks them to call him by his first name, comfortably, without formalities. Without delay, Lee explains that he'll ask for help from the strongest ghost he knows. He warns them to remain polite. The children quickly understand that there seems to be a ranking among ghosts, and Lee assures them they'll find out once they meet. Lee then performs a summoning ritual to call Kimoy to the hall. She manifests quickly, bringing with her a dense energy that makes Young-Soo feel unwell. As soon as she appears, Kimoy remarks that this isn't the boys' restaurant. To maintain respect, Lee apologizes for summoning her so suddenly and immediately explains the situation with the children. Even though Kimoy tries to be kind, her face is still terrifying to the little ones, who grow nervous. Straight to the point, Lee explains that these children are stuck in this place as ghosts, and he wants to know how to help them. One by one, the children say they want to go home, and Kimoy, holding her sword, asks if these ghosts have been bothering the cook about this. She then says that the children need to understand that even the dead should show moderation in clinging to the living. Lee, though he can see and talk to ghosts, still has to admit that the worlds they belong to are different. Respectfully, the protagonist explains that he knows this, but seeing these children who died so young asking for help makes him want to assist them. With that, our hero bows and pleads for Kim's help. In light of this, Kim asks Lee to step outside with her for a moment. Once outside, Kim tells him not to get too involved with ghosts anymore. While it's not wrong to feel pity, she explains, it's necessary to stop. Lee, for his part, admits that he may not be able to help all ghosts, but his heart moves because these are children. Kim comments that they're just ghosts, but Lee replies that this is precisely why he's acting this way. Seeing she won't win this argument, Kim tells the cook to do as he pleases, but one thing must be considered first. Only ghosts who can accept their deaths become lingering spirits or poltergeists. Back in the gym, it's explained that if one forcibly cuts ties with the earth, some past memories become blurry, and the chance of ascension is reduced. Thus, it's crucial to think carefully, as strong lingering attachments are tied to ghostly regret. Cutting such powerful ties comes with a significant cost. However, the children still want to leave more than anything. DMA is eager to be released, even though she doesn't yet know what her regret is. Soo, on the other hand, is just happy to be heading in the same direction as his friend. The hero watches their conversation from afar, then promptly takes Soo to a more secluded spot. Upon arriving, Lee remarks that it seems Soo already knows what's holding him back. Soo, feeling embarrassed, admits it's true, asking if it's that obvious. To comfort him, Lee assures him that he's probably the only one who noticed. Soo then shares his story, explaining that he's been friends with DMA since elementary school. In high school, he liked her but couldn't confess because he feared it would ruin their friendship. Then the accident happened. When the car came, Soo and the others were frozen in fear. He tried to help, but it didn't work out. As he watched the car approaching, he had one thought: he should have confessed his feelings. Now, he wonders what will happen to his friends if he ascends and leaves them behind. He laments that if he had acted a little faster, they might still be alive, but he doesn't want to confess just to ease his own guilt. This statement deeply impacts Lee, and before he can respond, Kim asks if she can proceed with her task. Soo agrees. Moments before she starts, Kim explains that when the ties binding them to Earth are severed, they'll feel like their bodies are floating. However, she warns them not to lose consciousness and to focus on thinking of their bodies as something heavy, something that can't move. Elle raises her hand and nervously asks what will happen if she can't manage it, but Kim doesn't know either. This, naturally, disheartens the children. Despite the uncertainty, they prepare for what's to come. Soo reminds everyone that if they fail, they should meet at 6 p.m. at the park where they always played. After reiterating the meeting place, Kim draws her sword from its sheath, makes several precise cuts, and finishes by planting the sword into the ground. A magical circle of blue fire forms, and the energy is so intense it creates powerful winds, causing discomfort. From the circle, currents of energy resembling water emerge, and to Lee's surprise, he can see the threads of lingering feelings that hold the children to this place. Without hesitation, Kim charges at the threads and, with a swift cut, severs them all at once. This is the crucial part, requiring the children's full concentration. Soo is the first to manage, staying grounded, but Yaram begins to float despite her friend's efforts to hold her. Unable to maintain focus, she is pulled away from Soo. In despair, he watches as the girl he never got to confess to vanishes before his eyes. Lee, also in despair, shouts her name. Kim sheathes her sword and reminds them that she warned them to concentrate. Lee, also in despair, shouts her name. Kim sheathes her sword and reminds them that she warned them to concentrate. However, despite Lee calling Yaram's name 3 times, she doesn't return. Soo, devastated, asks where she went. Kim replies that Yaram is somewhere in between, but no matter how far she drifts, she won't be able to cross the borders of the Underworld. She's still trapped in this realm. Facing this tragedy, and asks Soo what they should do now, wiping away her tears. Soo reassures her that Yaram will be fine, reminding her that she was the smartest in their class. All they can do now is believe in her. After everything is done, Kim states that she will leave and mentions she'll visit the restaurant again in a few days. However, at that moment, Lee is overcome with guilt, deeply affected by what the children are going through. Later, during the sports competition, it's announced that Muna is the most popular intern, but Yum's disappearance continues to haunt Lee. Though the children wanted to free themselves from their earthly attachments, no one could have predicted such a heartbreaking outcome. Lee begins to question everything what he could have done differently, whether he should have approached the children as a living person or as the owner of a restaurant that sits on the border of life and death. The manager notices Lee's mood and tries to comfort him, saying that even though he didn't get the position, it was good that he participated. However, the boy sinks deeper into depression. Kang, surprised, didn't know the intern wanted the job so badly. Still, he continues to console him, and because Lee can't explain his true feelings, he simply thanks him. Later, back at the restaurant, Ba comments that he was already wondering when Lee would slow down. Lee, still struggling to understand why Yaram didn't appear even after he called her 3 times, asks Ba why she didn't respond. Ba, in his typical fashion, remarks that he believes Yaram hasn't yet learned something essential. This piques the protagonist's curiosity, prompting him to ask, what is it that ghosts need to learn in order to be summoned? In response, the blonde explains that when a person dies and becomes a ghost, they're not much different from a newborn. The common sense they had in life no longer applies, so they must learn to live as a ghost step by step, usually with the help of another ghost. However, virgin ghosts typically behave this way, as do solitary ghosts, who tend to remain isolated due to their energy. Somehow, there's a connection between the two, which makes it difficult to approach them, even if other ghosts are around. Although it's an unexpected adventure, the blonde sees this as a happy twist of fate. He explains that it's unfortunate the children are separated from their friends, but if Lee hadn't appeared, they would have remained trapped forever. He assures Lee that it's not as if they'll never see Yaram again. In fact, through this opportunity, they can learn what's necessary to reincarnate. Even so, Lee still isn't sure how to feel, and Ba, despite his attempts to console him, can see the confusion on Lee's face without even looking directly at him. Just then, an agonizing pain takes over our hero's body. He struggles to endure it because the ghost doctor is performing acupuncture on his back, trying to release the tension caused by the sports event. His childhood friend, Ever the Joker, invites himself to play next time, but since he doesn't have a physical body, it wouldn't really help. In response, the boy offers to possess Lee and play in his place. Lee, skeptical, asks if he even knows how to possess someone. The boy confidently replies, "There's nothing I can't do." Initially, Lee thought it was risky to perform a possession, especially since Dr. Hyo refused last time. The doctor then explains that he refused because he wasn't familiar with it yet and that it's better to be cautious. After the medical session, Lee feels much better, and as payment, the doctor asks for a fried egg. However, Lee believes that one egg isn't enough, so he insists on making 2 in just a few minutes. After Lee leaves, the boy asks the doctor if possession is really that bad. The doctor explains that the body is like yin and yang, it needs harmony to stay healthy. When a ghost, representing yin energy, enters the body, it disrupts that harmony, which can be harmful to the living. Even for Hyo, who is a ghost living in the restaurant, it's important to maintain boundaries between the living and the dead. Later, as Lee reflects, a dream comes to his mind. He recalls the desperate children searching for their classmate after her disappearance. Among them, the boy who couldn't accept the harsh reality seemed the most broken. Kim had bluntly pointed out that ghosts don't matter that much, snapping Lee back to reality. Even now, Lee feels guilty for not being able to do more. While cooking, Ba suggests that Lee find some free time this Saturday, as there's somewhere he wants to take him. Lee assumes it's to buy another knife, but Ba denies this, explaining instead that he wants to visit Wamjong, the restaurant where young Soo used to eat when he was alive. A bit embarrassed, Ba admits he's heard the owner isn't feeling well lately. Lee, despite his initial reluctance, doesn't need much convincing. He agrees to go willingly, even without knowing the full reason. Ba then jokes about asking the doctor to possess him so they can check the owner's condition more thoroughly. When they arrive at Wamjong, Lee is impressed that Ba once worked at such a fancy restaurant. But as soon as they enter, everyone feels a strange energy. People quickly find excuses to leave, leaving the protagonist utterly confused. At that moment, Lee suddenly remembers Mrs. So will come, and Ba scolds him for not mentioning something like that earlier. After a bit of waiting, the girl's spirit finally begins to materialize, and Lee is happy to see the customer. Kim asks if it's okay to greet her outside the restaurant, and Lee apologizes, already asking what she'd like to order. The girl explains that she wants the fried chicken feet bokka used to make for her. However, Lee doesn't remember which page the recipe is on. Kim, on the other hand, thought Lee would still be shocked by the child's disappearance, but he seems to be handling it better than expected. In a few moments, the dish is served perfectly. The protagonist explains that besides the original recipe, he also added a bit of a twist by using a blowtorch to give it a burning flavor. Kim notes that the smell is a little different but seems pleased with the result. After eating, the girl asks if Lee still cares about the children from the gymnasium. In response, Kim offers the cook a shot of alcohol, suggesting they talk. Lee accepts the gesture, his mind still on the events of the past few days. As they drink, Lee confesses that the situation from a few days ago still bothers him. Kim, understanding, tells him that it's okay to feel this way, it shows his sincerity. However, she emphasizes that the emotion Lee should feel is not guilt. After all, he's working for the people on the other side of life now. But Kim adds, Lee still looks at ghosts the same way he looks at the living. This makes Lee pause and think. With a shot glass in his hand, he admits that when he first took over the shop, he was anxious and afraid of dealing with ghosts. But as he's come to know them, they seem so similar to ordinary humans. It's been hard for him to see the two worlds separately. Irritated, the girl remarks that deep affection sometimes narrows a person's vision, making them stubborn. Kim, with a sharp tongue, asks Lee if he really thinks she's just lecturing him about prejudice. She explains that if he doesn't find the right balance between the two worlds, he'll be the one who suffers in the end. Boundaries exist for a reason, and ignoring them can lead to serious consequences. Finally, the day arrives for their visit to Wamjong. As they sit in the plum blossom room, Lee feels a surge of anxiety. He's convinced he's doomed, especially after the embarrassing scene he caused by boldly asking to see the owner. Even though he's a bit embarrassed by his boldness, he knows he'll probably meet the owner soon. Ba, sensing his nerves, explains that this room is exclusive to esteemed guests, something that should make Lee proud. The boy asks what's wrong with the hero's expression, and despite not showing it, Lee finds it strange to be in Ba's workplace without him. Later, the owner finally arrives, greeting the guest who came to see him with a smile. The chef introduces himself as Kim Bong, and showing proper respect, the hero bows and introduces himself as a friend of Beong-soo, which the chef receives with enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the boy's spirit starts playfully interacting with his former boss, happy to hear that he's in good condition. The chef, in turn, comments that since Lee knows Ba, they can speak freely. He shares that even though they aren't related by blood, he always considered Ba like his own son. With that, Ba starts crying with emotion, while our hero nods, agreeing to the sentiment. Bong Ma then asks how they met, and Lee explains that he met Ba at the Pum Market, a place Ba frequented when he was bored. The chef asks what Lee does for work, and Lee replies that he's running a small restaurant in Nan. The chef remarks that considerable skill is needed to succeed in such a competitive area. Lee humbly explains that while he hasn't been cooking for long, he received a lot of help from Young-soo, and thanks to him, he's now able to do his best for his customers. Though a bit suspicious, Bong-an nods and believes his godson would be proud to hear that, so proud, in fact, that Ba can't stop smiling. This prompts Lee to remember the real reason for his visit. Sensing Lee's hesitation, Bong-an makes him feel comfortable, even though it's something a bit embarrassing to bring up. The doctor's spirit then explains that they need to check Bong-an's pulse, which requires holding his hands. Easier said than done, though, as it's difficult to find a reason for such a request. Ba, lacking a physical body, can't lend his hand, so he asks Lee for help. Still confused about why his companion is making such a fuss over a simple request, Lee directly asks if he can hold Bong-an's hand. Initially puzzled, the chef agrees once Lee explains it's something he saw in a dream. As Lee holds his hand, the invisible spirit examines the chef's pulse and notices it feels unnaturally cold. His blood circulation isn't flowing well, explaining the temperature issue. Unfortunately, it appears Bong-an is dealing with poor liver and kidney health. This deeply saddens Bak, who remembers his master being a very healthy person in the past, and he can't understand the sudden decline. Boldly, Lee asks when the last time Bong-an had a checkup was. The chef admits it's been a long time and asks why Lee is asking. Though knowing the chef might not believe him, Lee explains that Bong-an is probably having liver and kidney problems. Surprised, Bong-an asks if Lee also studied medicine, as he seems to know what he's talking about just from checking the pulse. Lee simply advises him to visit a doctor to confirm it, adding that it doesn't benefit him directly. But he couldn't stand seeing his friend so upset. Lee also mentions that he believes Young-soo appeared in his dream for this very purpose, reiterating the importance of seeking treatment. Lee, now someone who can easily reach out to ghosts and connect places that can never be crossed, feels this is his duty, as Mrs. So once mentioned. Finally, Bong-an agrees to get checked out, making everyone happy. But there's a catch: he'll only go if Lee does him a favor. Lee, thinking it's no big deal, agrees and says he'll do anything as long as it's not about money. However, Bong-em shows no expression, and Lee starts to realize he might have gotten himself into trouble. Bong-em declares that it's lunchtime, and the protagonist must prepare kimbap while everyone supervises. Lee initially thinks it shouldn't be too hard, but his nerves start kicking in. The chef advises him to relax and think of it as cooking for a friend. Ba, eager to help, offers his assistance since Lee's never cooked outside his own restaurant, but Lee insists on doing it alone. Ba, now grumpy about being refused, sits back. Lee decides to imagine he's making lunch for a friend's father, not a great chef like Bong-an, and recalls his previous experiences. This thought eases his nerves. He starts by washing the rice thoroughly, cooking it to enhance the umami flavor. Checking the ingredients, he's relieved to find them fresh. He washes the cucumbers, salts them, cuts the carrots into thin slices, fries them, and quickly assembles the ingredients. After a few more moments and precise cuts, the kimbap is ready for tasting. Lee, overwhelmed by all the attention, starts to feel the pressure. He refused Ba's help, and now Ba's too annoyed to offer again. Bong-an steps up to taste a piece of the dish, and his former godson hovers nearby, waiting for the verdict. The other chefs pick up pieces with their chopsticks, leaving Lee nervously watching the lack of communication. Finally, after tasting, they approve. One of them praises the rice's perfect texture and the precise seasoning of the ingredients. More importantly, the components are centered properly, a critical aspect of the dish. Ba congratulates Lee for passing the test, though Lee is confused about what test this was. The chef explains that while kimbap may seem simple, it's a fundamental dish in Korean cuisine. It requires delicate preparation, precise knife skills, and careful attention to the arrangement of ingredients and seasonings. This is why, whenever a new recruit arrives, the master chef always tests them by having them make kimbap. After the test, Bong-en returns to the kitchen and invites Lee to enjoy a bowl of noodles as a reward. The two sit together, sharing a meal. Even though the dish was quickly and simply prepared, it lives up to the name of Wamjong. Bong-en doesn't speak too highly of his own dish, remaining humble despite the hero's praise. But Lee doesn't stop praising the dish and sensing a shift in the conversation. The chef apologizes for the inconvenience of asking Lee to cook. It had, after all, thrown him off a bit since he had never cooked outside his own restaurant before. Apologies are made once again as the chef explains that he needed to test the culinary skills of his Gotson's friend. Bong Ma then says that knowing Lee runs a restaurant on his own reminded him of the old days, and that's why he thought of helping. After all, a friend of someone who is like a son to him deserves at least a photo to hang in his shop, right? Lee catches on what's being proposed as a poster in his shop, a chef's approval stamp that could attract customers. However, the chef explains that after tasting the boy's dish, his thoughts have changed. Although it wasn't perfect, Bong-en could feel the time and effort invested in Lee's journey to improve his cooking. The chef tells Lee that, for someone who is already finding their own path, sometimes too much help can actually hinder growth. So, rather than offer direct assistance, he makes himself available to help whenever Lee faces difficulties. And when the time comes, Bong-en will be there to guide Lee not just as a friend's father, but as a senior chef. Following this heartfelt speech, Lee calls Ba over, and the boy quickly joins them. Deeply moved, the hero tells Ba that the chef is an incredible person, making Ba beam with pride. One of the cooks approaches and teases Lee for being the guest of honor. At first, everyone thought Lee was an apprentice because of the kimbap he made, but now they understand his true worth. In fact, one of them even suggests that Lee leave his own restaurant to become an apprentice at theirs. This friendly banter creates a warm and cheerful atmosphere, filled with nostalgia for Ban, who is thrilled to see his old colleagues enjoying such a pleasant moment together. Meanwhile, in another part of the story, a car speeds through a forest, bouncing over rocks due to the weak suspension. The sudden jolt wakes Lee from his sleep. He apologizes for dozing off, but the driver reassures him that it's no problem. Lee remembers planning a trip after eating and chatting at Wamjang, but now they're far from civilization, winding through a mountain road. Bong-en hadn't mentioned anything about this, and the situation starts to feel a little tense for Lee. Apologizing again, the hero asks where they're headed. The chef explains they're going for that checkup, recalling that Lee had been practically begging him to get one. A reservation had been made in a hurry for that same day. Lee, confused, asks why he's tagging along, and Bong-en simply points out that, given Lee's dream, it would be good for him to confirm his suspicions firsthand. Soon, they arrive, but not at a typical clinic. Instead, they pull up to a large temple hidden in the forest. It's no ordinary place. In fact, it's the biggest temple Lee has ever seen. He's grateful he didn't bring Ba along, knowing the boy wouldn't be able to enter, likely getting expelled by the Gate of the Four Heavenly Kings. Despite the complicated path, they arrive safely. Bong-en explains that he visits often because this is where Ba's tomb is located. It's also a place where he can receive medical treatment. The chef urges Lee to go say hello to Ba, while he has other matters to attend to. Lee asks if they shouldn't go together, but Bong-en insists he needs to take care of something else first. With a gesture toward the building where Ba's tomb is, he assures Lee that the boy will love knowing his friend is here. As Lee inspects the gravestones, he begins to worry he can't find young Sue's memorial stone. Worse, he can't read Hanja Chinese characters. Just when panic sets in, someone kindly points out the correct stone. The man is a monk who greets Lee in the traditional way. The monk recognizes Lee, calling him the one who feeds the hungry. Lee, embarrassed but unable to lie, admits it's true. The monk, already familiar with Lee's work, asks how it's going. Understanding that this man knows more than expected, Lee admits that things are progressing. The monk then asks if Lee is the man working in the restaurant of the afterlife, to which a startled Lee asks how he knows about that. The monk simply replies that some connections defy explanation. At that moment, the chef arrives, delighted to see the monk. He introduces the man to Lee as Di-Yan, a monk and a prominent figure in Korean medicine. Di-Yan greets Lee and asks what brings him here. Lee explains that he regrets not being able to say a proper goodbye to his friend on his final journey. The monk understands and apologizes for interrupting the reunion. With the formalities over, Di-Yan guesses that Bong-en came to deal with health issues and offers Lee to join them for tea. He jokes that the health diagnosis will probably trigger a long, drawn-out story. Soon, they sit down for tea. While removing his shoes, Lee reflects that Di-Yan worked as an Oriental doctor before converting to Buddhism. Still, it's strange that the monk knows about the restaurant of the afterlife. Could he have some special powers? After the examination, it's confirmed that the chef's kidneys and liver are indeed in poor condition, just as Lee suspected. Bong-en admits he's been feeling more tired than usual lately. The monk explains that his body is crying out for help. Treatment will be required 2 days a week, which pleases Bong-en. It doesn't seem too overwhelming. However, Di-Yan isn't as certain, and the chef apologizes for jumping to conclusions. He will need acupuncture until he feels better. But the idea of long needles doesn't exactly thrill Bong-en. Meanwhile, Lee receives a call from Tekwang Trading Company. An employee named Soo-hong introduces himself and apologizes for calling during the holidays. He explains that he heard about Lee's restaurant, highly recommended by manager Troy. Soo-hong wants to make a reservation for 4 people that Saturday, asking Lee to prepare a menu for Chinese clients. Lee agrees, hoping they enjoy their meal. Returning to the conversation, Lee approaches the monk and asks about the chef's condition. Di-Yan confirms that Bong-en will rest for a while, but is otherwise fine. Gathering his courage, Lee asks the question burning in his mind: how does the monk know about the restaurant of the afterlife? The monk recalls that in his youth, he had many encounters with the afterlife. Lee wonders if this man ever visited the restaurant under Mrs. Backer's management, but Di-Yan denies it. He reveals he visited a similar restaurant in another region, leaving Lee stunned. He had always assumed there was only one such restaurant. The monk clarifies that there are many, at least 9 across the country, each serving departed souls in their respective regions. Lee realizes that with so many ghosts in the world, it makes sense for there to be more than one restaurant. In fact, there are even similar places in other countries. After the monk's explanation, he asks if Lee's doubts have been cleared. However, the hero still has one more question. How did the monk know he was running such a restaurant? In response, Di-Yan simply says he just knew, as if by some supernatural power, though he decides to keep other details a secret. That day, the protagonist learned many things, but it felt like there was always more to discover. Back in the city, all the required dishes were prepared according to Chinese cuisine. The HR employee, Soo-hong, was happy that everything went well and praised the food, noting how much everyone enjoyed it. Lee realized he had done a good job researching Chinese food with his assistant. However, upon closer inspection, Lee noticed something strange. A ghost was following the guests wherever they went. Soo-hong asked for a moment with the cook, and Lee quickly offered to meet all their needs. Translating for the elderly guest, Soo-hong explained that the old man was grateful for the hospitality and wanted to offer Lee a drink. The hero accepted, but the ghost standing nearby was bothering him, staying unnervingly still. They exchanged glances, and the ghost smiled at Lee, making him even more uneasy and disconnected from reality. Lee wondered if the ghost didn't know this was a restaurant of the afterlife since he hadn't eaten anything yet. Making an excuse, Lee stepped out, saying he needed to bring more food. The customers understood without complaint. Before leaving, the hero excused himself and asked the ghost to follow him to the kitchen. A few moments later, Lee prepared a dish of stir-fried pork with red pepper, something the ghost likely hadn't tried before, as it wasn't a Korean dish. The ghost accepted it eagerly, and Lee realized they could communicate even without speaking Chinese. After eating, the ghost introduced himself as W. Kang-jun, saying it was a pleasure to meet Lee. The hero, surprised but polite, reciprocated. It was his first time meeting a Chinese ghost, as it's not easy for souls to cross borders. Lee, startled, asked if the boy was actually the guardian spirit of the old man. Kang-jun wasn't sure if he was a guardian, but explained that the man was his younger brother. This revelation shocked Lee, as Kang-jun's appearance made him seem much older, meaning the ghost was likely over 50 years old. Being a Seoul, it was inevitable that Kang Jun had been alone for a long time. Lee asked if Kang Jun stayed behind out of concern for his brother. Kang Jun couldn't answer precisely, but he shared that the Reaper had already told him he couldn't ascend to the heavens due to lingering feelings. Lee, curious, asked if lingering concerns could really last that long. He wondered if Kang Jun even remembered much from his life. In response, Kang Jun admitted that his memories were fading, becoming blurry over time. This situation reminded Lee of Jerem's friends, who had also faced a similar problem. To change the atmosphere, Lee asked if there was anything else Kang Jun would like to eat. Although Kang Jun initially declined, Lee insisted, saying he wanted to prepare something that would touch his heart. Embarrassed but persuaded, Kang Jun revealed he would love a simple dish, noodles with egg. The memory of the Wan brothers revolved around this dish, but it was a much simpler recipe than expected. Thinly sliced green onions were used for seasoning, and fine noodles were lightly boiled and then strained. As the dish came together, the old man caught a whiff of it and made his way to the kitchen, nostalgia flooding him. He told Lee he missed that smell, and Lee welcomed him warmly. The protagonist explained that he heard the old man loved noodles, so he decided to make a simple one. This impressed Kang Jun, who marveled at how they could communicate without language barriers, another magic of the restaurant. The eggs were beaten quickly and mixed with the noodles, preventing them from cooking too much in the heat. Kang Jun explained that eggs had been precious when he was alive. He couldn't imagine having them in abundance as he did now. When he earned money, he would buy a few eggs and cook them for his younger brother, who loved them despite their simple lifestyle. The moment Kang Jun tried noodles with eggs, he felt like an emperor. This recipe, though simple, held deep memories for Kang Jun and his younger brother, Won Noya. It was a dish made with love, shared between the two brothers during difficult times. When Lee served the noodles, it was with great respect. Sue and the two sat down to eat, with the old man's eyes shining as he tasted the first bite. Other ghosts often recall stories from their past when they eat their favorite foods, but the noodles with egg didn't seem to evoke many of Kang Jun's memories. Still, the ghost asked Lee to bring some raw garlic, explaining that his brother always liked to eat noodles with a bowl of garlic on the side. Without delay, Lee fetched it, surprising the old man with his knowledge. Su Hong then asked about the name of the dish. Kang Jun smiled and said it was called the Emperor's Noodles, a name he had invented because the dish was something special, shared only between him and his brother. Back in those simple times, this meal was the most delicious thing in the world. To complete the moment, Kang Jun said a drink would make everything perfect, so Su Hong went to fetch one. After eating quite a bit, the old man began sharing memories. He explained that since their parents had passed away during the war, Kang Jun had been like both a father and mother to him. Despite the blurred memories, the old man still remembered his brother as someone reliable and worthy of respect. However, there were times when he couldn't shake the feeling that Kang Jun had abandoned him when he was young. Lee, concerned, asked what he meant by that. The old man explained that after their parents died, Kang Jun had taken on the responsibility of raising him. There were times when Kang Jun had to leave his younger brother behind to go work. On a fateful day, Kang Jun remembered feeling that the way home was far. He thought resting for a while would help, but for some reason, he didn't remember anything after that. Lee realized this could be a case of sudden death. He had seen similar situations before, like when a colleague fainted from exhaustion at a construction site. The old man explained that he was only 8 years old when this happened. When his brother didn't return for more than a week, his initial concern turned into anger. At first, he worried about Kang Jun's well-being, but after a week of painful hunger, worry gave way to bitterness. One day, the old man decided to leave home, doing everything he could to avoid starving to death. It was an exhausting struggle, and many times he thought dying would be the easier way out. At some point, he had a painful realization. If survival was this hard for him, perhaps his brother had abandoned him for the same reason. However, the hero suddenly shouted, "That's not true," startling both the old man and the ghost. The old man, confused, asked why Lee had shouted, but Lee just repeated, "It's not true." He explained that he believed someone who cared so deeply for his brother wouldn't abandon him like that. There had to be reasons beyond his control. But the old man shook his head, denying this possibility. He insisted that his brother had definitely abandoned him. Confusion crept over Lee, and in response, Won Noi explained that if it wasn't abandonment, it meant his brother had died that day, the day he didn't come home. And even so, Won Noi had resented his poor brother for decades, which would be unbearably cruel if true. Lee thought for a moment. He realized that all this time, Kang Jun had likely been watching over his younger brother, bound as a guardian spirit. It seemed more like a punishment. Kang Jun couldn't defend himself, offer comfort, or even explain what had really happened. He must have wanted to tell his brother the truth to reassure him that he hadn't abandoned him, and that he was sorry. The old man, however, was still struggling to accept this new version of the story. But over the years, Wan Noya had learned something. Being resentful for decades wasn't so different from missing someone. And the fact that he couldn't forget the taste of noodles with egg, the meal they shared, was proof of this. Knowing the truth and accepting it were two very different things. Still, Wan Noya finally gathered the courage to accept it. Lee, sensing the heavy mood, quickly apologized for bringing up such a somber topic during what was supposed to be a pleasant meal. Hoping to lighten the atmosphere, the old man smiled and changed the subject. He recalled how his brother had once said they would drink together all night when they became adults. And now, even though the sun was still high and his brother wasn't physically there, he invited Lee to drink with him. The old man repeated his invitation, asking if Lee intended to join him. Lee, thinking back on the promise Kang Jun had made about drinking, suspected there was a clue to Kang Jun's lingering feelings hidden in it. Wan Noi explained that during the first 10 years after his brother's disappearance, he was consumed with resentment. In the following decade, his memories began to fade until they were little more than shadows. Now, he couldn't even remember his brother's face. But while eating this bowl of noodles, he could at least remember the sound of his brother's laughter. He could still hear his brother's voice telling him to eat more and share his portion. Wan Noya's mind drifted to a memory of his older brother scolding him for poor manners. As a child, Wan Noya had begged his brother to buy him sweets, and when Kang Jun refused, young Wan took it as a lack of love. His brother had sternly asked him to promise never to say such things again. But in his childish mind, Wan misunderstood once more, thinking his brother simply didn't want to spend time with him. Despite Kang Jun working tirelessly to support them both, he always seemed to break his promises to play with his younger brother. The memory hit harder when Wan Noya recalled how, one day, he had waited patiently to eat dinner with Kang Jun, despite being hungry. That patience had made Kang Jun so happy that he went straight to the kitchen to prepare their beloved noodles with egg. After serving the dish, young Wan Noya had noticed his brother drinking something alone. Kang Jun had explained it was something only adults could drink, but this didn't stop Wan Noya's curiosity. Kang Jun then made a promise. The day his younger brother became an adult, they would drink together until dawn. To seal the deal, they made a pinky promise. Despite Kang Jun being both a father figure and an older brother, he regretted not being able to give his younger sibling more. A few coins were never enough to make up for the loneliness his brother must have felt. Feeling increasingly emotional, Wan Noya filled his last glass of the night. Before drinking, he made a vow that when he met his brother again, he would cook him the emperor's noodles. His brother had always been bad at keeping promises, but this was one Wan Noya intended to fulfill. In a moment of symbolism, Lee handed the glass to the ghost, Kang Jun. This was a moment not meant for Lee, but for Kang Jun and his brother. It was the last chance to fulfill that old promise. As the two brothers shared their drink, something changed for Wan Noya. For the first time, he could see the image of his younger brother sitting across from him, drinking with him. Kang Jun asked his brother to return just a little slower, because he couldn't surpass Wan Noya's patience. He apologized for taking so long to keep his promise. With that, the pinky promise was finally fulfilled. Kang Jun, with tears in his eyes, began to ascend to the heavens. Even after decades, he had never forgotten the promise he made. Lee watched in silence and wished Kang Jun peace in the afterlife, knowing he deserved it. Wan Noya, with tears of his own, remembered that he had once told his brother that if they ever made a lot of money, they would feast together. But in the end, all they needed was a simple bowl of noodles with egg. After experiencing such a powerful moment, the old man collapsed, overwhelmed with emotion. As others rushed to help, he heard someone call him Chobo. That was the nickname his brother had given him as a child. He knew then that the voice calling him back, telling him to return slowly, was indeed his brother's. Later, as Lee cleaned the restaurant, he wasn't entirely sure what had just happened. Yet it seemed clear that Wan Noya had heard Kang Jun's voice, perhaps a true miracle. Lee found himself wondering more about the mysteries of the restaurant. Was there anything left that could surprise him? Just as he thought this, he noticed a few checks in his hand, though he didn't remember when they had appeared. Much like with the other ghosts who had ascended, Lee thanked them and decided he would use the money carefully. Running this one-meal restaurant was turning out to be far more rewarding than he'd ever imagined. Yes, it required time, attention, and effort, but seeing the customer's satisfaction was something he could feel deep in his skin. And honestly, the money wasn't bad either, especially when it appeared in unexpected ways. Still, Lee couldn't help but worry about the ghosts outside the restaurant. There must be others like Mr. Kang Jun who couldn't find their way in. Lee decided to contact Lawyer Shin to ask if there was a way he could interact with spirits beyond the restaurant's walls. When he called, Lawyer Shin answered from his car, already asking, "What's the problem this time?" Lee explained the situation, and after listening carefully, Shin concluded that the cook had probably interacted with ghosts from other places already. Lee, trying to find the right words, admitted he didn't want to pretend he couldn't see them. But he hadn't called just to make excuses. He wanted to know how he could help these ghosts, instead of just ignoring them. Lawyer Shin, amused, told Lee he was adapting well to the restaurant. Then he asked, "Do you know why heroes in movies hide their identities?" He explained that too much attention tends to interfere with actions and plans. Overwhelming attention directed at specific individuals can make things difficult. The hero didn't quite get it at first, so it was clarified. If the ghosts know there's someone who wants to hear their stories and fulfill their wishes, they'll all be tempted to gather and ask for help. This could not only mess with his personal life, but also interfere with his work at the restaurant. Lee understood that something like this could actually happen. However, Lawyer Shin encouraged him to try anyway, saying that he and his brothers had been welcomed by their mother and lived next to the restaurant. They had seen more ghosts and heard more stories than Lee had so far encountered. Each brother reacted differently. Some listened, some tried to solve the ghost's problems. For now, Lee was advised to follow his heart. The warnings were simply Lawyer Shin's concerns, but he reminded Lee that these weren't ordinary living people he was dealing with. Lee, not one for extremes, assured him he understood. Then, the call was abruptly disconnected. Lee was puzzled, but figured it was just the lawyer navigating traffic. In the end, it was decided. Lee would follow his heart despite the warnings. After all, they were just ghosts. Lee would do his best to understand their stories and emotions. As the owner of the restaurant, even if he made a mistake, Shin promised to cover for him. Just as Lee approaches with a tray carrying the meal, he spots a bottle on the floor. He almost trips but manages to dodge it. His customers are already tipsy from drinking, and the chef, now excited that the proper dishes are ready, notices the two continue drinking non-stop even though they're clearly intoxicated. Lee remembers that Bong Nam had asked for a bottle of soju some time ago, but he hadn't expected them to drink this much. Still, he serves the beef abalone porridge and crispy sweet tofu to both of them. In the end, Lee is happy to see the two getting along well, even with a ghost lingering behind them. After serving the dishes, the hero asks the master not to drink so much, considering his health issues. Bong Nam thanks him for everything and praises the boy's cooking skills, though he comments that the restaurant feels colder than usual. The old man agrees. Despite their comments, Lee feels fine. When he glances at the clock, he realizes it's almost 11 p.m. He makes an excuse, suggesting it's probably due to the amount they've been drinking. The old man understands and says they don't need to stay much longer since they've already had a good time. Bong Nam agrees. Both praise the meal and the enjoyable time at the restaurant. Wang Kanoya mentions that the dinner was made even more perfect because he had someone to drink with. Before leaving, the old man says he'll leave money for the meal on the counter, and Bong Nam does the same but also leaves a welcome gift for his dear friend. Lee tries to refuse, saying it's unnecessary, but Bong Nam insists, explaining that sometimes the price is determined by the customer. Additionally, he gives Lee a special drink produced annually at Woodham Jian, a gift for him to taste as a cook. As the two men leave, Bong Nam asks if his new friend has called a taxi. The old man replies that his son-in-law will pick him up. Lee says goodbye, and they leave in a pleasant atmosphere. Lee is happy to see them become so close. At this moment, Ba, his assistant ghost, starts crying at the beautiful scene. To tease his friend, Lee asks if Ba is jealous. Ba denies it, which leads to a playful argument between the two. However, after a few moments, Ba's greatest fear starts approaching. Lee notices his assistant's change in behavior and asks why. Ba explains that the ghostly maiden, their boss, will arrive in about 2 minutes. It's not yet time to open, and that's why Ba is getting increasingly flustered. Since all the ingredients are prepared, Ba asks to be called back after Kim, the boss, leaves, then dashes out of the place, leaving Lee alone to greet her. As expected, Kim arrives. but the footsteps indicate the presence of another person. Naturally, Lee greets them properly, and the guest is revealed to be the lost girl, Yuram. Lee is overjoyed and immediately checks on the girl up close, making her ask if something is wrong. Obviously, there was something. Lee had been extremely worried about her all this time. Lee even cries, thinking it was his fault she went missing. From afar, Kim disapproves of this display of emotion, having told Lee before to distinguish between ghosts and humans and not give his heart away so freely. Still, the girl had already given up on trying to stop him. 10 minutes later, after much crying, Lee brings some glasses to the table and asks how the two ended up together. Kim explains that she brought the girl there, and Lee asks where Yuram had ended up. Incredibly, she replies that she ended up in North Korea. Naturally, she was surprised, too. All she could see around her were mountains and fields, so she had walked in a direction she thought was south until Kim found her the night before. Lee asks if Kim had been searching for Yuram all this time. Kim nods, and Lee thanks her, offering to repay her in some way. Being a simple woman, Kim says she'll accept gratitude in the form of a meal. Before anything else, Lee asks for patience, as he will serve drinks first. Yuram hadn't eaten anything, and since Kim brought her there, it was up to Lee to feed her. Of course, Lee takes on the commitment, and to repay Kim, he decides he can't just serve a simple soju. Fortunately, there was a special drink he had received earlier, the perfect choice for this moment. After preparing the dishes, Lee serves Yuram some omuris and stir-fried pork with garlic and alcohol, which surprises her. Meanwhile, Kim opens the drink and encourages Yuram to eat everything. Lee notices that the girl seems to have received some etiquette training before coming to the restaurant. After opening the bottle and tasting a little, Kim realizes this isn't just regular soju. Lee asks how it is and explains that it's a homemade drink from someone he knows. He was told it was good, which is why he served it to Kim. Fortunately, Kim approves, much to Lee's satisfaction. He also offers an apple he got from Mr. Do, which is described as delicious. Initially, it seems strange, but the two decide to try a peach, and upon eating it, they are amazed by its incredible taste. However, they wonder if the good taste is just because they hadn't eaten apples in a while. Kim remarks that since peaches aren't something you come across here, it's bound to be delicious. This makes Lee wonder if they're just regular peaches. Soon after, Kim and Yuram prepare to leave. Kim mentions that if Yuram wants to return to her hometown, they need to start moving quickly. Yuram thanks Lee for cooking for her a second time. She even explains that the ramen he made at the retreat was great, but eating at the restaurant was even better. Before leaving, Yuram promises that next time, she'll bring her friends so they can all enjoy it together. Lee smiles and says he looks forward to that day. As they depart, Lee feels a great sense of satisfaction. After the girls leave, he reflects on it all and believes that young Sue would have loved the moment. Back at the restaurant, all the customers are served with care and attention. However, one of them reminds Lee that he ordered an egg roll. Lee promptly heads to the kitchen to prepare it. Ba, still dazed from the earlier emotional moment, snaps out of it and brings up that the restaurant seems emptier than usual. Lee doesn't quite get it at first, considering the place is packed. But among the tables, one is indeed empty, the one that belonged to Choi Hyang, who's been missing for days. After the shift, Lee tries to test this by attempting to summon Choi from the rooftop, but no one comes. Ba suggests that maybe Choi is busy, even as a ghost. This leads Lee to question what kind of work a ghost could have. Ba explains that even ghosts can get caught up in their tasks. As a last resort, Ba suggests that Choi may have ascended. Even though it's only been 2 weeks, there's no set timeline for ascension. In the past, Lee would have been nervous about not seeing his friend anymore, but after all the advice and experiences, he's learned to remain calm. Still, Lee wonders if there's a way to know if Choi has ascended. Ba surprises him by revealing there is a way. Ba calls Jay's finance and asks for information. The employee on the other end explains that while they can't disclose everything due to privacy laws, they can confirm that Mr. Choi hasn't ascended yet. This news is enough to put Lee at ease. Before hanging up, the employee asks if Lee can visit the bank in person. Lee, a bit nervous, misinterprets the request, thinking it's a death sentence. The employee clarifies, explaining that since Lee has taken over a restaurant in the afterlife, it might be useful for him to see how things work there. Maybe witnessing it firsthand will help him better understand the spirits he deals with. Lee agrees and asks how he can visit. The employee explains that by placing their business card on the basement door, Lee can access the bank. The hero imagines it as a magical passage, but the employee prefers to call it the science of the afterlife. Lee thanks him, relieved that his friend hasn't left without saying goodbye. Ba, seeing the sadness on Lee's face, promises to ask around about Choi's whereabouts. This lifts Lee's spirits, and with a renewed sense of purpose, he decides to visit Jae's finance. When Lee arrives at the basement, he finds himself deep in thought, marveling at how he can cross into such a place with just a simple card. He recalls the many stories of living people crossing over to the afterlife, like the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice or the tale of Princess Bari. The journey is always depicted as incredibly difficult and dangerous. Lee had imagined his journey to Jae's finance would be the same. But he was wrong. The moment he crosses the door with the card, he falls into a blank, empty space. Looking around, he's confused. Then, without delay, other doors open, and more people start falling into the same space as Lee. A crowd forms, making it hard for him to stay on his feet. Among the falling people is the employee, Do-ye, who quickly comes to Lee's rescue. Do-ye jokes that Lee almost got sucked in and asks what his first impression is. Lee, still amazed, says everything feels incredible, though it's clearly a strange and different world. Do-ye explains that first-time visitors are always shocked by the experience. Lee asks if all the people here have already passed away. Do-ye replies that many who work in the afterlife come and go from this place after all. The afterlife is also a society, one that needs people to function. This realization makes Lee understand that death isn't the end, but merely a new beginning. The sheer size of the line at Jae's finance impresses Lee, and he suddenly remembers what his friend once said: he's finally seeing the line all ghosts fear. Do-ye explains that the line is intentionally designed this way to consume time, because, in the end, time is money. After some time, passing through strange and giant ghosts, they finally arrive at Jae's finance. The door seems modest, considering the otherworldly journey they've just had. Do-ye simply says, "Welcome to the branch." Lee thinks the entrance looks ordinary, but knowing this is one of the places ghosts fear most, he braces himself. Determined not to panic, no matter what he sees inside, he enters and everything is completely different. Do-ye welcomes Lee warmly, as expected. The underworld always surprises, with things far beyond common sense. Lee compliments the place, which, despite its small size, feels cozy and inviting. Do-ye, ever the gracious host, offers a cup of coffee. He explains the coffee beans are roasted with a special grass from hell, known for its incredible warming power. The soda, meanwhile, is made with water mixed with honey harvested from the Sushan flower garden in the underworld. Impressed, Lee comments that it all seems surprisingly similar to the world above. Do-ye, with a grin, tells him to taste it before drawing comparisons. Lee takes a sip of both and is blown away by how much tastier it is than he expected. With drinks in hand, Lee recalls Do-ye mentioning something for him. He asks if this was it, but Do-ye reveals something else: a debit card linked to Lee's new Jae's finance account. This impresses Lee, and when Do-ye offers to check the balance, Lee declines. If there's too much, he might get lazy. If there's nothing, he'd get anxious. Best to avoid both, he figures. Shifting gears, Lee asks if he can use the debit card to buy food from the underworld. Do-ye beams, pleased Lee likes the idea. He explains that purchasing underworld goods is no problem, and even mentions a convenience store in the building, popular with customers before they return to the afterlife. It's quite similar to the stores in the world of the living. Do-ye happily introduces the 7 best-selling products, as chosen by Underworld magazine. Lee notices the store sells ramen, lunchboxes, and dried meat, but he's thrown off by the fact that they also sell ointments and kitchen knives. He's confused, but Do-ye brushes it off, saying, "It's a convenience store, after all," though even he admits that doesn't make much sense. Among the top sellers, the winner is Hell's Underwear, renowned for keeping you so warm that, even if you walk through frozen hell, you might still get heat stroke. The second best seller is an ointment that can regenerate limbs even if your arms and legs get cut off. Finally, the third most popular item is an inspection knife made from the leaves of hell blades. It's tough to maintain but can slice through radishes, cutting boards, and annoying customers in one go. Every restaurant owner in the afterlife apparently has one of these. Talk of hell reminds Lee of the final judgment, and Do-ye explains the whole situation. He tells Lee that sins are judged at the gates, and the real torment of hell begins after that. Lee, morbidly curious, asks about places like frozen hell and the hell of blades. Do-ye informs him that the skin-shredding cold and flesh-ripping blades are just waiting rooms. To survive, ghosts have had to develop special items to help them through these terrifying realms. Dee eventually asks if Lee has chosen everything he wants to buy. But by this point, Lee is so spooked that his desire to shop has evaporated. Still, he leaves the store with a lot of purchases, pleased with his haul. Dee asks how he feels about using his new card. Lee admits it feels a little strange, like it's not really his money. As a parting gift, Dee gives Lee an apple from the tongue-ripping mountain. Lee initially accepts the fruit gratefully, but is horrified when Dee casually mentions it's grown on stretched-out tongues in the tongue-ripping hell. This is where people atone for sins committed with their words. Their tongues are stretched and used as agricultural fields, with 100 apple trees planted on each person's tongue. Apparently, due to the abundance of oily-tongued sinners in recent years, the harvest has been fantastic. Lee swallows hard, suddenly less enthusiastic about that apple. Dee reminds Lee that the most important thing in the afterlife is to take care of yourself while you're still alive. After getting a taste of hell's cruelty, Lee promises to do just that. Before he leaves, Dee mentions something else. Lee should consume the items he bought from the Underworld carefully, as they can influence people in the living world. Dead or alive, you can't just go around messing with powerful Underworld goods willy-nilly. As Lee prepares to return home, he finds the door doesn't respond to his touch. Dee explains that a key is needed, but not just any key. Lee's own memories will guide him back. He simply has to think of a door and imagine himself walking through it, allowing his soul to connect with it. Dee asks which door Lee would like to think of. After reflecting on his life, Lee realizes the place he wants to return to most is his restaurant. Even though he's only recently started working there, it already feels like home. Back at the restaurant, Lee is exhausted after his wild underworld adventure. He wonders if young Soo has found Hak Hein yet, blissfully unaware of the strange events unfolding around him. He assumes that since his friend is a ghost, he'll figure things out. After all, ghosts are probably better at navigating the afterlife than he is, right? But as Lee contemplates his next steps, he has no idea how much is truly happening behind the scenes. Meanwhile, in the city, among a crowd of people, a female ghost wanders aimlessly, corrupted and lost, yet still crying out for help. Ba, still searching for Lee's missing friend, stumbles upon her, but things take a darker turn. A malevolent aura surrounds her, and Ba realizes she's not the only lost spirit haunting the living. The situation grows more complex as the mystery deepens. And that's where we'll leave it for now. If you don't want to miss the next part, make sure to hit that notification bell.